Yun stood in front of a mighty oak, from which a mysterious glow emanated. The tree beckoned mystery, and hid the portal in another world. The young man came closer and extended his hand, but the door did not open. Something interfered, and he could not understand what the reason was. A few more moments passed before the guy touched the rough, covered with moss of the bark, and at the same moment something incredible happened. A portal was revealed in front of him, leading to unknown Dali. But barely bewitching light illuminated his face. Black twisted hands burst out of the darkness. They stretched to him, eagerly trying to grab. Covering in fear, Yun rushed away. Suddenly a mechanical signal of the system, a proposal to switch to a new level, a chance to save the world, suddenly came from above. But now he was not up to this. The only goal, to survive, he fled, not looking around, hoping that he could escape from the claws of darkness. The monster was approaching every second. His paws were already reaching for the victim. A roar rang behind, after the young man a fiery dragon was chasing. Yun repeated himself, even faster, you need to run and not stop. But the monster overtook him. Everything around was illuminated by bright, fiery light. Yun still wanted to flee, but recovering he realized that he was in bed. He rose in confusion, looking around. The woman sitting nearby froze in surprise for a moment. In the first seconds, she did not even have time to rejoice. But after a moment, her eyes filled with tears. She rushed to hug the guy. Her dear son finally woke up. Mother said that he was in a coma for 3 months. No one hoped that the young man would come to his senses. Yun tried to calm her down, but immediately noticed something strange above her head. The woman looked at her son in bewilderment. She did not understand what he was talking about, although some letters really began to form over her head. Yun pointed a finger at a mysterious inscription, but his mother only watched him in confusion, not understanding what was the matter. And suddenly the meaning appeared. The word mother was written there. Yun barely managed to touch the inscription. At that moment, the woman remembered that it was urgent to tell her father that the son finally woke up. The husband was still next to his sister. The young man instantly became worried and asked what was happening with Xiaohua, why she needs help. The girl has been unconscious for a long time. Her face was hidden by an oxygen mask, and the devices supported life functions. But her condition remained unstable. Yun found out that 3 months ago they were suddenly attacked by the monsters who appeared from nowhere, attacked him and his sister, leaving them in serious condition after the collision. The guy looked thoughtfully at Xiaohua in an attempt to realize what had happened, but the memories were confused, and he could not understand why their attack was so destructive. Suddenly, in the guy's memory, that moment surfaced when he touched the mysterious tree, feeling the power emanating from him, and guessed that it had changed at that moment. Now everything became clear. It was he who let the monsters into this world, and the awareness of this terrible truth made him startle, because the young man involuntarily became the cause of the disaster. Father interrupted the thoughts of his son, considering his words delirium, because the monsters appeared all over the planet, and one person could not be the cause of their invasion. Yun looked at the man in amazement. If the monsters really attacked the whole world, it means that the scale of the tragedy is unimaginable. In response to his doubts, his father extended the phone, on the screen of which urgent news was going on, and suggested watching himself to make sure what was happening. A new portal was opened in the city, from which the monsters broke out. But the hunters have already entered the battle, and restrained the flow of creatures that threaten residents. Journalists assured that the situation is under control. The hunters prevail, and soon the monsters will be driven back to their world again, where they could no longer harm. The father explained that such scenes are taking place around the world, and Yun with curiosity asked who the hunters are and where they came from. The man explained that these people appeared simultaneously with monsters, outwardly no different from ordinary people. But their ability to fight remained a mystery. That is why they are called heroes hunters, because now the world is completely dependent on them, and only they are able to withstand the monsters that fell upon humanity. Suddenly, the nurse burst into the room, abruptly interrupting the conversation, and asked if the family had enough money to continue the treatment of their children. The father replied that they had almost agreed on the loan. It remained to wait for approval. But the woman reminded that there were no places in the hospital, while other patients were waiting. Yun froze in a shock, realizing that his parents had already spent a huge amount on his treatment, perhaps putting the family in a difficult financial situation. The father looked away and admitted that the attack destroyed their house. Now they live in a temporary asylum provided by the state, and they no longer have money. Mother, restraining tears, said that they could no longer pay for treatment, so the hospital insisted on discharge, but Xiaohua still needs help. Hai Yun was stunned. Would her sister really abandon? She survived the attack of monsters, but without treatment, her condition can become critical. At that moment, the young man noticed something strange. His gaze became more attentive and allowed him to catch important details. A luminous arrow suddenly appeared in the corridor, persistently indicating Hai Yun the path forward and forcing him to turn around the corner. The young man thoughtfully went forward, but the mother, worried about his behavior, tried to stop her son and wanted to follow him. However, Hai Yun turned around and calmly said that he just wanted to walk. It seems that his parents did not see these strange indicators. Father took his wife's hand, asked her not to worry, and noticed that the guy now needed to be alone, because he had just learned too much. Meanwhile, Hai Yun continued to follow the shooters who clearly pointed his way to him, as if someone intentionally led him to a certain place. Suddenly, one of the doors opened and a young nurse appeared on the threshold, who smiled affably and invited him to relax. She assured that if he needs something, the patient could always press the call button. But the young man was more interested in why the arrow brought him here. The girl noticed his thoughtfulness and asked with curiosity if he needed help. His voice sounded soft, but notes of anxiety glided in him. Hai Yun froze for a moment. A strange feeling did not leave him, as if it turned out to be inside a certain educational stage, similar to a game tutorial. The nurse frowned, seeing his silence, and with light excitement, asked if everything was in order with him. Carefully peering into his face, embarrassed, the young man quietly asked if there was an opportunity to get a discount on the treatment of a sister. But he himself tried to understand why the arrow brought him here. The nurse calmly replied that if the family cannot pay for treatment, then Xiaohua will have to leave the ward, because the place is needed for other patients. Hearing this, Hai Yun felt rage. Such injustice seemed monstrous to him, because it was about the life of his sister. He could not believe that doctors would really refuse to save a person only because of money, and shouted these words to the girl right in the back. Then he added that if doctors talk about the salvation of lives, then why cannot they save Xiaohua, because this is their duty? And saw that the girl was trembling. She turned around. Her eyes were full of tears. And the lady quietly admitted that she also did not want to throw a girl, but could not change anything. And then anger sounded in her voice. She asked with pain that the guy did not see that the whole world was covered with chaos, that the cities are destroyed, and people die every day. The hospital does not have enough doctors or medicines, all supplies at the end, and you have to spend the last money on the purchase of medicines abroad. The girl admitted that only a student is a doctor. She doesn't know how to help, but tries to help. Her voice trembled, and tears flowed down her cheeks. Seeing her despair, Hai Yun apologized in confusion, realizing that he had said too much, and said that he did not want to blame the lady of what was happening. The girl added that her father was also wounded, but they could not pay for treatment. And all this happened because of the damned monsters who destroyed their lives. Hai Yun thought, she was right. No one could save anyone without money and medicines. And the nurse suddenly accidentally remembered that the hunters find medicines right in the portals. These words interested him, and the hero asked the details, to which the girl replied that there were not only medicines in the portals, but also other valuable things that hunters sell. Hope flashed in the soul of a young man. If this is true, it means that he can also become a hunter and get medicines for his sister, saving her on his own. The girl staggered sharply and said with surprise that if everything were so simple, she would also become a hunter. But when checking, it turned out that she had no ability. After these words, the lady turned away and hurried away, finally saying that she did not have time for empty conversations, because patients are waiting for help. Hai Yun shouted after that he had not even recognized her name, and in response, he heard that the girl introduced himself like Kiki. Already more peacefully, the lady added that she is not holding evil. Now everything is on the limit due to a difficult situation. The young man was in amazement and suddenly realized that something was incredible. He could see, and perhaps even change the names of people over their heads. At the last moment, Kiki, she said that she was going on business, and the guy is better to return to the ward and relax while he has such an opportunity. Hai Yun noticed important information above the lady's head, and tried to inform her. But the girl did not listen and confidently walked forward along the corridor. All his attempts to stop her were in vain. The lady was too busy with her thoughts and deeds, so that she quickly disappeared from sight. The young man frowned. It turns out that these strange inscriptions are visible only nearby, and he could even interact with them. The guy went away, continuing to think about the words of Kiki and the test of hunters. If there is a test that allows you to determine the abilities, then the guy also needs to go through it, because this is a chance to help his sister and, possibly, to the whole world. But suddenly the hero froze. From afar the desperate scream came, and his heart sank from anxious foreboding. Without hesitation for a second, Ha-yun rushed towards the noise. His legs themselves carried him to where something was dangerous. Soon, an alarming scene unfolded in front of him. Some man grabbed Kiki by the hand. His voice was full of rage. The villain demanded that the girl save his brother, otherwise threatened that she would pay for her life. She looked at him with horror, trembling with fear, but firmly stated that his brother was dead before arriving at the hospital, and the doctors could no longer do anything. However, her words did not reassure the attacker. The bandit's face was distorted from pain and anger, and in the hands of one of his satellite's weapons flashed. The angry bastard refused to believe these words, stated that the girl was carrying nonsense, and bending closer, brought the knife to her face. At that moment, Ha-yun resolutely intervened in the brawl, sharply pushed the attacker, and he froze for a moment, staring at him dumbfounded. Without wasting time, the young man firmly stated that if this disgrace would not stop immediately, he would call the police, and he would not be greeted to the attackers. The leader of the bandits only laughed in response, and mockingly asked if at such a time someone else hopes for the aid of law enforcement officers. One of the nurses, taking advantage of the moment, rushed to the exit, shouting loudly on the run, which urgently needed to call an orthopedist. Strong men learned what happened and were ready for decisive action. If these bandits ran into trouble, then soon they will be very regretted that they decided to raise their hand on innocent people. The girl pointed to two villains who pumped their rights and threatened defenseless nurses. At this moment, two criminals, realizing that they were waiting for a difficult future, rushed, not wanting to face terrible orthopedists. The nurse sighed with relief, and then with sincere gratitude turned to guys named Lao Li and Xiao Zhou. Their help turned out to be timely. Meanwhile, Ha-yun turned concerned about his new acquaintance, noting that the bastards perhaps damaged her hand during the fight. The girl, trying not to show pain, assured that everything was in order, and added that she needed to continue bypassing patients, because she has a lot of work. A moment later, the lady turned away and began to leave, and Ha-yun looked thoughtfully after her, feeling that she had not told the whole truth. The young man caught up with her and said that it was not worth lying, because in fact there was a huge wound in her hand. But Kiki only dismissed, calling it a scratch. Suddenly, right in the face of the hero, a sign with a congratulation broke out. He completed a quest called the Salvation of the Companion, and now he could choose a reward. Ha-yun peered into the inscription puzzled, trying to understand what kind of increase in the level was being discussed, and what it means at all. Without thinking for a long time, he nevertheless pressed the increase button, deciding to check what would happen if you take this opportunity. The next moment, something incredible on the head of Key, a sign appeared, reporting that its level increased from 0 to the first. The girl looked stunned in front of her, feeling that something had changed in her body, as if forces had returned to her with new energy. When the lady looked at her hand, she saw how the mysterious green glow completely protracted all her wounds, leaving no trace. It was something amazing. Kiki could not understand how this could happen at all, because before she had no special abilities. The young lady with excitement said that she suddenly found the skills of a healer, although she had recently been sure that she could never become a hunter. On TV, the girl has repeatedly seen how others healed the wounded, but now she was amazed to understand that she herself had the same force. Tears came to her eyes. Chi-Chi always said that she had no superpowers, but it turns out that now she really has become a hunter. Ha-yun was even more numb, thinking, is he really able to increase the level of other people, simply completing the quests? The young man joyfully looked at the new familiar and sincerely congratulated her, saying that she was now a hunter, and her life has completely changed. But suddenly, the guy felt an unpleasant pain in his shoulder. He did not even notice how he injured during a brawl with bandits. Chi-Chi drew attention to his movement and worriedly said that it seemed that his friend was also injured, but he dismissed, saying that this was just a little pain. The girl did not argue, approached him and carefully laid her hand on his wound, holding her there for a few moments. The next moment, she unexpectedly began to slowly pull his outer clothing from him, and Ha-yun instantly burst into a faint from embarrassment. The nurse calmly said that he would not move, after which she concentrated magical energy in her hands, preparing to use healing forces. In addition, the girl began to pronounce some kind of spells. which even more introduced Ha-yun into a state of extreme confusion and surprise. The healing force continued to act, covering his wound with a soft radiance, until in the end, she completely cured him, not even leaving the scar. Having completed the treatment, Chi-Chi said that everything was in order, her mission is over, and now she can afford to rest a little. The young man was beside himself with delight. He did not hurt anything else. The body felt light and strong, and this ability was simply incredible. However, it was noticeable that it looked extremely tired, as if healing took her a lot of effort and energy. The girl noticed his restless look and hastened to assure that everything was in order, because she really likes to help people. Ha-yun, with some chagrin, looked at his new familiar, realizing that she could already heal others, and he still has no special skills. While his own level was still the first, it was now that it was a first-level doctor, although a mysterious question mark stood next to this title. The young hero thought, trying to understand what this means, and then he decided that if there is an opportunity to become a hunter, then he should definitely try. Without thinking twice, Ha-yun confidently headed forward along the deserted, dilapidated streets, filled with echoes of the destroyed world. It was not surprising that now the bandits were operating everywhere, because they had nothing more to be afraid. The old order collapsed, and the world plunged into chaos. The memories of how the guy ran away from the hospital surfaced in his head, especially the moment when his mother begged him to stay, but he lied, saying that he was walking behind replaceable clothes. At heart, Ha-yun hoped that he really had some abilities, and that he could later be justified before his mother for this lie. Finally, he reached the department by definition of abilities, which turned out to be an ordinary bus, and felt a slight excitement. All this seemed too simple, almost unrealistic, and from this the young man only tensed stronger. In such situations you always need to be on guard. Entering the office, the guy ran into a tired, indifferent man who was sitting in a chair and lazily asked if he had come to test his abilities. Ha-yun was slightly surprised at this technique. Is it really here, in such a provincial place, that they really evaluate future hunters? The man, noticing his doubt, only grunted and assured that everything that deserves the result that deserves it is extremely honest and transparent. With these words, he opened a strange metal box in front of him, in which, according to him, Ha-yun had to put his hand for testing. Ha-yun slowly approached the table, listening to the words of the inspector, who explained that since the opening of the portal, everything came to chaos, and the exact definition of force has now become a difficult task. The young man did not doubt the veracity of these words. With the advent of the portal, the world really changed beyond recognition, and the former order collapsed. But the next moment, the inspector unexpectedly tensed. His face was distorted by worry, and Ha-yun, noticing this, impatiently asked what was happening. The man slammed the box with lightning speed, showing with his whole appearance that the check was over, not letting the young man even briefly look at the result. Ha-yun was discouraged, because the device clearly showed that he had the first level, but the inspector categorically stated that the guy was not a hunter. Then a man with a played sympathy added that he understands his disappointment. Many dream of becoming hunters, but not everyone is destined to save the world. Ha-yun thoughtfully peered into the space in front of him, in an attempt to comprehend this, and then, without saying a word, turned around and went to the exit. Still considering a strange test, the young man got out of the bus. His thoughts were confused, and the anxious feeling did not leave consciousness. Suddenly, a group of bandits arose right in front of him. Their arrogant smirks left no doubt that they were waiting for him. One of them, with a smug grin, invited the guy to join their ranks, assuring that the experience was not required. They will teach everything that is needed. Ha-yun froze in thought for a few moments. The words stuck in the throat. This is impossible. But one of the guys, grunting good-naturedly, assured that there was nothing to worry. Ranks, points, and abilities. All this is nonsense. No one would look at official indicators. The bandits suggested leading him to the portal right now, assuring that they needed another person, and Ha-yun is perfect. They introduced themselves to the hunters, and the main among them, Leizi, is the most experienced and respected in the group. Leizi neglected that all these grades, complete nonsense. Official inspectors do not understand anything, and are not able to determine real power. Ha-yun felt disappointed, but in the words of this man there was something truthful. Otherwise, why the verification machine could not recognize his abilities? There was no particular choice, and the guy decided to try to agree to join this group, to which the bandits reacted with genuine enthusiasm. After some time, they went forward, to the place where the portal will open up to the unknown. Ha-yun felt an anticipation. realizing that it would be a difficult mission, but still burned with the desire to take part in it. When they went further, no one noticed how the appraiser in silent bewilderment looked at them. Soon a rather sad picture appeared before the guys. The entrance to the parallel world looked very gloomy. The group moved to the portal, among the ruins of destroyed buildings and torn from the root of trees. Haiyun stunnedly examined this place in front of his eyes, and the young man could not believe that this is actually possible. Lei Tzi friendly patted him on the shoulder, asking if his friend had ever seen something similar. Having calmed down a little, Haiyun smiled tightly and nodded. Yes, he really saw. The leader of the group explained that each portal has a number, but this does not have it yet. He asked if the newcomer guessed why this was happening, and explained that the reason was simple. No one knows what is hidden inside, which means that everything that they find belongs to them. Haiyun tried to object that it was illegal, but the bandits only laughed, saying that the laws mean nothing in the current world. They resolutely went to the portal, inviting Haiyun to go with them, but he hesitated, feeling that he was not ready yet. Lei Tzi mockingly abandoned that preparation is useless, because he has a team, and they will cover it, because now friends. The leader confidently stated that there was nothing to be afraid of. You just need to enter the abyss and take everything valuable that it would be possible to find. The rest of the guys looked at each other mockingly. A contemptuous grin froze on their faces. Lei Tzi has already persistently pushed Haiyun to the massive door, announcing that the newcomer was honored to open the portal. The young man froze in confusion, and was in doubt. It is still incomprehensible how he deserved such a privilege. The bandits only grinned and explained that they have a tradition. Beginners always open the portal. With a slight bewilderment, Haiyun reached for the door handle, which at first glance seemed the most ordinary. But the next instant, bright flashes of the light flashed before his eyes, blinding and surrounding the hero from all sides. The guy swallowed frantically, realizing that there was no way back. If he wants to become a hunter, fear would have to be discarded. Having gathered all the determination, Haiyun tightly squeezed the door handle and turned it, ready to step forward. But what happened next plunged him into complete confusion. Did not expect such a guy. Before the eyes of Haiyun, an ordinary apartment opened. No flashes, monsters, or mysterious landscapes. Suddenly, a sharp shout was heard from the side. The appraiser ran up to them, demanding that he stop immediately and not enter the portal. The bandits only looked at each other, and then, pushing, one by one rushed inside, deciding that money is more important than any warnings. Lei Tzi, grinning, turned around, watching how this naive type desperately tries to catch up with them. The man rushed to the portal with all his might, but it was too late. At the very last moment, the door slammed right in front of his nose. The appraiser cursed, but could no longer do anything. The portal absorbed the hunters. Inside, Haiyun looked at it bewilderedly. The guy did not understand why they were forbidden to enter here. But Lei Tzi only dismissed, saying that there was nothing to worry about. Nevertheless, an alarming foreboding did not leave the young man. That man was a representative of the government. Lei Tzi grinned coldly, and noticed that if Haiyun listened to the appraiser, he would have remained outside, because he did not have the official status of a hunter. With these words, the bandits confidently moved forward, and Haiyun remained standing still, not finding what to answer. One of the guys knocked on the shoulder, friendly on the shoulder, and advised not to think about superfluous. They are defended by Brother Lei, and it is better for him to obey. Suddenly the whole group froze. Something went wrong. An inexplicable cold ran through the backs of the hunters, forcing them to be numb. Before their stunned glances, a frightening sight opened. Dozens of petrified people froze in the flight, as if trying to avoid imminent death. None of the gang never saw anything like that. For the first time, they felt real confusion. Lei Tzi Closmano noticed that it was not worth panicking. They have already opened many portals, and strange things in such places are not uncommon. However, the passage forward was completely blocked. It was necessary to look for another path. One of the guys went to check the next room. Haiyun, overpowering himself, moved in the other direction. He always thought that portals, it was like dungeons in games. Come in, fight with monsters, get a reward. But reality was much worse. Opening a new door, Haiyun could not get rid of a constant fear, but resolutely crossed the threshold. A scene appeared in front of him, from which the blood froze in the veins. Stone people froze at the stone table, apparently, when it was an ordinary family. But now they have turned into lifeless sculptures. Haiyun was shocked, as if at one moment their whole life broke off, and the bodies were covered with a cold stone. One of the guys stepped closer and gloomily said that sometimes different reality intersects in the portals. However, even he first saw people who were once alive. Laitsi again dismissed anxious thoughts, saying that this portal was no different from the rest. Then his gaze fell on the cabinet in the corner of the room, where precious stones gleamed. With a tricky smile, the commander proclaimed that they were now rich. It was exactly the prey for which they came here. The leader of the gang turned to Haiyun and beckoned his hand, holding out a small ingot. "To beginners, a gift is laid," he said, holding out a strange stone to the young man. Haiyun did not understand what it was, but his friends hastened to explain that this is a healing crystal that is used in hospitals. And Laitsi, a generous and caring leader who is always worried about the new members of the team, Haiyun carefully accepted a valuable gift, and the captain easily noted that this was just a sign of friendship and special affection for beginners. One of the guys jokingly advised to hide the gift away, because in the cave it was easy to drop something, and then shrugged, hinting that it was definitely not worth losing it. Meanwhile, Laitisai pointed to crystals in the distance, explaining that they need to be collected, because after the sale, they will bring a huge profit that can be shared. The commander warned that this would not be easy, since Haiyun is inexperienced, but entrusted him with penetrating inside, collect as much booty as possible, and then offered to divide for the sake of speed. The young man thoughtfully asked his friend if he had at least the simplest weapon, because in an unfamiliar place he felt too vulnerable. Friends laughed and assured that there was nothing to be afraid of, because there were only crystals, after which they extended the headphone, explaining that with his help you could keep in touch with the team. Haiyun still doubted the safety of this mission, but Laitsi confidently stated that everything was under control, because it was so light in the tunnels that even the lantern would not be needed. Meanwhile, the group was gloatingly talking among themselves, mocking the newcomer, who was too shy and clearly did not understand what he was involved. Haiyun carefully advanced along a semi-dormant tunnel, deciding to start a search from the farthest part of the cave in order to quickly complete the task. At the same time, the team discussed him. The bastards were convinced that he did not suspect anything, because he was too young and inexperienced, which means easy prey. Laitsi quietly gave the order to take everything valuable to himself, but strictly forbade to touch the crystals, and the guys grinned, because they themselves knew that it was impossible to joke with this. Haiyun plunged deeper into the dark corridor, with every step felt growing anxiety, but nothing unusual happened. The young man held a crystal in his hand, and could not believe that Laitisi turned out to be such a good person, because it was thanks to him that he could now save his sister. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a strange sight, from which the blood froze in the veins. A petrified girl, frozen in the moment of time, stood right in front of the guy. For several long seconds, Haiyun looked at her in complete confusion, in an attempt to realize that he was not just a stone statue, but something else. A sudden surge of fear made him rush away. His heart was pounding furiously, and horror covered consciousness, did not give the opportunity to stop. The guy understood that everything was too dangerous here, and this find scared him to such an extent that his legs themselves carried him away from this damned place. The next moment, a new thought flashed through Haiyuna's head. Perhaps the portal somehow moved these people here from a completely different world. He did not leave guilt for what happened, and the young man began to suspect that this whole series of terrible events was connected precisely with his appearance in the portal. Suddenly, a strange noise rang from behind, from which goosebumps ran down his back, and his hands involuntarily clenched into his fists. The young man turned sharply, his breath caught, and his heart was beating with a vengeance, when something incredible, going beyond reality, appeared in front of him. The stone girl stood very close. Her frozen, frighteningly empty eyes seemed to dig into his soul, and the body, contrary to logic, slowly and ominously moved. Haiyun staggered back in horror, but his gaze was faced with this strange creature, which, without losing a second, continued to approach. The panic seized the young man. His fear was so strong that he screamed, without controlling his own emotions. Meanwhile, a terrible figure, despite its stone essence, moved forward with perseverance, from which the guy had a breath. He was numb. However, after a moment, Haiyun managed to pull himself together, turned sharply, and forgetting everything in the world, rushed away, shouting out desperate calls for help. At the same time, his team, having heard screams, only grinned, watching what was happening with frank pleasure. Laitsi, with a malicious smirk, looked at each other with his comrades, and made them understand that everything was going according to plan. Now the most interesting in this whole story begins. The guy hid behind the protrusion of the wall. His breathing was shot down, and his fingers frantically squeezed the stone. But suddenly, the space around was filled with a green glow. Bright mystical light scattered the darkness, instantly covering everything around, and even frozen stone people seemed to begin to absorb it, plunging into the radiance. The sculptures quickly fled forward. The narrow corridors of the tunnel shook from their steps. These stone creatures, frighteningly reminiscent of people, stretched forward from the darkness. The green glow filled everything around, fully enveloping the revived statues that seemed to dissect the space, gently moving through a thick veil of mystical light. The bandits, without wasting time, turned into a familiar passage, in the hope that the guesses about their route are true. The magic door, hidden in the depths of the dungeon, swung open with a slight creak, releasing dazzling light, which for a moment overshadowed everything else. They were incredibly lucky. Behind the massive threshold the guys were waiting for, not only the way out, but also the countless treasures flickering in the rays of the light. There was little time left. Laitsi, gritting his teeth, gave the order to his friends to grab as many values as they could take away, without risking linger. Hai-Yun, meanwhile, rushed forward. His heart pounded in his chest, and consciousness rushed about in attempts to realize what was happening. But instinct led him further. Finally, a giant tree grew in front of the young man. Its roots went deep underground, and the branches stretched up. He stopped in confusion, looking around in a vain attempt to understand where he was and how to get out of this ominous maze. But there was no time to think. Fear pushed the guy to the movement. Therefore, discarding doubts, Hai-Yun dived into the first tunnel that came across, hoping for a miracle. Hai-Yun quickly made his way through the cave. His breath was straying, and his heart was pounding in his chest. But there was no way ahead. Only endless tunnels. Suddenly, figures began to loom out of darkness. New stone creatures came out of the walls. Their bodies looked ominous, and empty eyes exuded a terrible threat. They pulled forward their frozen hands in an attempt to grab the young man. Hai-Yun backed away in fear, but there was no way to retreat. He was seized with a numb, but only for a moment. Then the young man retreated sharply, clenching his fists, and his gaze darted in search of a way out of this trap. In a desperate movement, the guy leaned over. His palm came across a cold stone under his feet. His fingers instinctively clenched around him. Without wasting time, Hai-Yun accelerated, and then with all his might hit his next enemy. The stone silhouette scattered into pieces. The roar filled the space, the fragments scattered across the floor, and the young man himself froze in confusion, and looked at the result of his blow. He could not believe that it turned out to destroy one of them, that his strength may really surpass his expectations. The inspiration swept the hero, but then another anxious thought came. How he could go here without weapons and protection. At this moment, the guy realized how dangerous his carelessness was, and without hesitation, grabbed the walkie-talkie to contact Laitsi and demand weapons. The bandits at that time already loaded the produced jewelry, and the young man tried to reach them, but his words drowned in the hum of their conversations and clang of metal. The leader with a grin noticed that it was necessary to hurry, because this wimp will not reach for a long time, which means that time should not be spent on it. One of the minions grunted, and added that in fact, Hai-Yun was useful, because thanks to him they found so many treasures. These words echoed the young man echoed. He suddenly realized that all this time he was simply used, and this discovery pierced him like a dagger. Inside the hero, everything was colder, his hands trembled, and every word of villains pulsed in his head, shook the mind and caused dull rage. In anger, the young man demanded an answer. Did he really deceive him? But in response from the dynamics of the radio, there was tense silence. Laitsi muttered under his breath that, finally, someone began to understand. But too late. The cards have long been played out. There is no more exit. The next moment, the leader laughed loudly and shouted into the apparatus so that the next time Hai-Yun was a good boy who was listening to the elders. With these words, the bastard raised his leg, and with force stepped onto the walkie-talkie, turning it into a pile of angry details and fragments that were scattered to the sides. Hai-Yun tore off the headphone from which a strange crack was heard. Now there was no doubt that all this time he was simply used as a bargaining coin. The anger boiled in his chest. These liars do not even realize who was doomed to inevitable death. Even those terrible monsters who were teeming in the dungeons seemed more honest and more understandable than these traitors, who so skillfully pretended to be his friends. Suddenly, a slight movement was heard from behind, and the guy felt how the stone lady was approaching everything inside. Her empty eyes inspired primitive fear. But this time, Hai-Yun was ready. His fingers closed on a wooden stool, which suddenly became his only weapon in this battle for survival. And angry, he sharply jumped out of the shelter, and at the same moment, a fire flashed around the guy disappeared, and left only animal rage with the desire to fight. Ha-Yun furiously waving a stool, fighting off the approaching threat. And at that moment, it seemed that he was finally disturbed by horror and rabies. But suddenly, for a moment, the mind cleared up, and a frightening thought occurred. He was really ready to kill, was ready to destroy everything that stood in his way. Meanwhile, the stone creatures did not stop. Their massive hands stretched to the young man, and threatened to close on his body while he tried to break through them. The heart pounded in a frantic rhythm, but Ha-Yun did not allow himself to hesitate. He rushed forward, tightly squeezing his impromptu weapons. However, the next moment, something went wrong. The stool hit the stone body with a bang, but did not inflict the slightest damage. Hope instantly faded away. The guy threw out a stool and frantically hid in hysteria, while the stone hands were rapidly approaching, ready to click on his body. The young man rushed sharply forward, rushing away along a narrow tunnel. But the idea that he was not able to defeat these monsters was burning consciousness. Suddenly, something even more terrible happened, and the cold stone hand suddenly grabbed his ankle, not allowing him to break out. This was the last straw, and Ha-Yun shouted in a panic with a broken voice, demanding that he be released immediately, but there was no answer. In the next instant, he turned around with horror, realizing that dozens of stone hands stretched out of the darkness, as if wanting to absorb him. The hero did not have time to comprehend what was happening. The blinding stream of light suddenly broke through the darkness and fell directly on him. Fully shocked, Ha-Yun felt how he was losing support under his feet and falling down, while the nightmarish hands stretched after him. Now the young man no longer doubted these monsters ready to crush him, break the bones and leave to die in this damned cave. It became impossible to move. Each inhalation was given to burning pain, and the awareness of imminent death covered him with his head. Closing his eyes, Ha-Yun mentally prepared for the inevitable, realizing that there was no more exit. Only a cold hug of death awaits him. This went on for a rather long time. The guy lowered his head, and the rocky hands were all approaching, with every moment squeezing the ring around him more and more. But unexpectedly, the hero felt a new surge of strength. A fiery flame concentrated around him, flared brighter, as if it were an answer to his inner anger. Some unknown force threw him aside. The young man was completely shrouded in fire, but instead of pain, he felt a strange feeling of confidence and power. Finally, the guy managed to jump and get to his feet. He realized that he was no longer tired. The fire supported his body and mind. The next moment, Ha-Yun was surprised to find that all his wounds were instantly dragged on, and the pain disappeared. Only a light tingling left behind. A system window flashed before his eyes, which reported that the young hero switched to the second level. But he himself did not understand what exactly led to this result. The guy backed back. All this circumstance, although he gave him strength, did not save him from annoying enemies who still strove for him. Nevertheless, the young man was surprised to find that it became much easier to move. His reactions accelerated, and the body felt filled with invisible energy. The guy did nothing, but for some reason the level increased, and now he had to find out what exactly caused this leap in development. The next moment, Ha-Yun lost the soil under his feet, but was not afraid. But on the contrary, he took advantage of this to quickly jump forward. On the run, the young man thought that now it's not the best time to solve these riddles. First, you need to get out of here alive, and only then look for explanations for everything that is happening. But to do this was not so simple, because the rocky monsters surrounded him from all sides. There were too many of them, and it seemed that there simply was no way out. The guy resolutely jumped forward, and abruptly pushed away from the ground, using a new surge of strength, which helped him escape from the ring of enemies. A few more moments passed before the young hero began to fall down, rapidly approaching the solid surface, but at the same time completely controlled his body. Ha-Yun deftly landed on the ground and realized that he could not run away forever. He needed to come up with a plan, otherwise there would be no chance of survival. His last blow did not inflict any damage to the enemies, which means that it was necessary to understand what it was the young man who felt at the moment when he could break them before. The guy began to recall his feelings, scrolled the details of the battle in his head, tried to catch the moment when his attack was really effective. Ha-Yun recalled how at that moment he literally burned with anger, feeling the incredible hatred that pierced his body, filled him with power. The young man disappeared around the corner and reflected on his discovery, watching how rocky monsters thoughtlessly pass by. Not noticing his presence, he tried again to evoke the same feelings in himself, fired in his soul rage, anger, and complete indignation, in the hope that this would again give him the power to fight. Soon, the guy really succeeded. His whole body caught fire from the inside, covered by an inexplicable flame that filled his consciousness with powerful energy. The young man sharply jumped out. His scream tore the space. He felt wildness, squeezed his fist so much that the knuckles turned white with tension. Only one moment passed before the hero struck his opponent. And at that moment, even the air trembled from the surge of his strength. Now Ha-Yun understood what to do, and rejoiced at his small but significant victory. Gradually, the guy masters new power. However, the very next moment, his face was distorted in pain. He felt a sharp, piercing pain, which he did not feel last time after the blow. Suddenly, the appraiser ran out towards the young man. His voice cut through the silence when he screamed desperately, and warned that he could not fight his fists. Ha-Yun froze for a moment, and lost his speechless person who withstood the same man who at the very beginning measured his strength. The man, without losing a second, said that urgently needed to find an item that can be used as a weapon, and that absolutely anything is suitable. With these words, he leisurely took out a regular ballpoint pen from his pocket, and then calmly opened it, and Ha-Yun in complete confusion followed every movement of this strange man. The man made a sharp movement, and instantly attacked a stone man. His movements were verified and accurately, as if he had honed this deadly style for years. The blows followed one after another, with a terrifying speed and strength, tearing stone creatures into parts, their massive bodies showered with piles of dust and fragments. The rocky blocks collapsed under his onslaught, flying through thousands of small debris, and could no longer recover. Finally lost their strength. The man did not stop for a second, and cast a sharp look at Ha-Yun, ordered him not to stand aside, but to look for a weapon, because together they have more chances to win. The young man, raising his head, squeezed his fists, said loudly that he was ready for this, and then quickly rushed forward. In the distance, his gaze caught the wall, in which a huge iron tea sack was deeply stuck, left by someone a long time, covered with a layer of dust. Ha-Yun grabbed the hilt with both hands and felt the cold of metal. It was this weapon that will help him cope with ruthless stone creatures. However, it was much more complicated to pull out the test than the young man thought. Despite all his efforts, he seemed to have grown to the wall, not succumbing to even the strongest jerk. The guy remembered how earlier he raised his chair earlier, twice as heavier than his own weight. And then his partner advised him to take advantage of emotions, anger, fear, hatred. Ha-Yun again felt the heat. His body swept over a fiery glow, blood boiled in the veins and the muscles were filled with force. The hero slowly brought his hand closer to the weapon stuck in the wall, and felt how the cold of the metal was making his way to the bones. But the cleaver did not give in. A friend advised the young man to concentrate. Feel how frantically his heart is pounding, how hot blood accelerates power throughout the body. The main thing was to cause a feeling of imminent death, to feel the threat as if there was no way back, and the only way out is to direct all energy into action. Ha-Yun, passing every word through himself, squeezed the hilt with force, and realized that the method really works. The metal seemed to begin to give in. However, the partner warned that it is impossible to lose concentration. Emotions should not only be awakened, but direct them into the weapon. Otherwise, the force would dissolve into an empty one. At that moment, a crunch rang out. The man shuddered sharply from the blow, and the next second, his body collapsed to the ground, crushed by an unexpected attack. A giant stone fist at a terrifying speed approached him, and everything indicated that it was no longer possible to avoid a deadly blow. Without hesitation, Ha-Yun abruptly broke. His body was seized with a fiery aura, and he, like a red, hot spear, rushed towards the enemy. The flame was spinning around him. The air was filled with heat, and a wild, unbridled rage flashed in his eyes. At the last moment, the young man overshadowed the defeated partner, squeezed his weapon tightly, and looked with contempt at the approaching enemies. A few more moments passed. Ha-Yun quickly cut the air with his dex. The partner was completely shocked, because this guy was surprisingly good to get rid of enemies, as if he had the skills of an experienced hunter. Finally, in the place where stony monsters until recently stood, only a pile of useless stones remained. Ha-Yun, out of breath, took a breath of this battle was incredibly complex, filled with danger and tension. Nevertheless, the guys were not going to lose vigilance, because in this place the monsters could appear again at the most unexpected moment. A friend noticed that Ha-Yun was well managed with the power of the hunter, but it was unclear how it was possible, because he should not have it. The young man thought for a moment, because for him this was a mystery. But then he admitted that perhaps he was also a hunter and wants to check it. The man frowned. Did he really make a serious mistake and could not correctly determine the guy's abilities? However, there was no time to reflect, because there was a lot of energy in this place, which means that there was a chance that the monsters would come to life again. Without thinking twice, the guys rushed to the exit. They sought to leave this damned place as soon as possible and avoid a possible danger. Finally, friends got upstairs, and the partner immediately caused reinforcement, warning that the threat level was extremely high and it was necessary to act urgently. After that, the man turned to Hyuna, saying that the guy should stay nearby to make sure that the portal no longer posed a threat. Hyun looked at the pen in surprise. It was with this subject that the friend fought with the monsters, which seemed completely incredible. Intrigued, the young man asked whether it was possible to use any pen as a weapon, or it has some special properties. The man explained that in theory, anything can become weapons, because everything depends solely on physical strength and the ability of the fighter. He then added that this is the basic knowledge of any hunter. And it is strange that the guy climbed into the portal, not knowing such simple things. Hyun gratefully looked at his partner. Without him, he would have to die in this deadly place. In response, the man only sighed significantly. He understood how difficult this situation turned out to be, and what lessons had to be learned from it. These people, real villains, who lure newcomers with a fraudulent way. As soon as a person penetrates the portal through this door, it cannot be opened outside. So each one that came inside turns into a sacrifice. Hyun thought for a thought who his new acquaintance, and asked the name, to which the man replied that his name is Lee Benhwa. He is a hunter, but he was not participating in the battles and does not wear weapons. Suddenly, the car drove up to them and interrupted the conversation. The rumble of the motor came over the road, forced both to be wary and pay attention to the approaching transport. Apparently, this was the expected reinforcement that arrived to assist or strip the territory. Young fighters without delay rushed to the newly formed portal. One of the guys, already being at the entrance, turned and thanked Lee Benhwa for the work done, to which he only nodded slightly, and accepted his gratitude calmly. Hyun watched what was happening with confusion, and the next second, a system that analyzed the people present flashed in front of his eyes. The displayed data showed that all these fighters had a high level, from 40 to 45, which made them really strong hunters. However, the most amazing was that Lee Benhwa's level reached 60, which significantly exceeded the indicators of the rest, although he did not participate in battles. Meanwhile, Lee Benhwa said that they need to go to the car to conduct repeated testing of abilities. A few minutes later, they reached a massive bus, which served as a mobile check base. The appraiser was surprised to note that the new test results were confirmed by Hyun's hunting abilities, although his level remained quite low and raised questions. Realizing that now he can officially become a hunter, the young man experienced great joy, because this discovered completely new opportunities and prospects. Lee Benhwa only sighed heavily. He understood that the presence of a low level of abilities would not reduce the desire of Hyun to risk his life. But the guy confidently promised to be more reasonable. The partner explained that if the young man really wants to become a hunter, he needs to undergo training at a specialized training center. But minors need to be permitted by parents. As a sign of support, Lee Benhwa handed him a business card on which his number was indicated, emphasizing that in the event of questions, he is always ready to help and give clarification. Before saying goodbye, the man expressed the sincere hope that this case would serve as Hyun with a lesson, and the young man would no longer act so recklessly. The guy nodded energetically, assuring that now he would definitely think before committing another risky act, realizing all possible consequences. Having reached the hospital, the young man slowly walked along the street, thinking about what happened. His position has changed very much in just one day. Suddenly, an alarming thought broke out in his head. He told his mother that he had gone for replaceable clothes, and now he did not know how to explain his long absence. Subbed in thought, the guy put his hands in his pockets and suddenly felt for something firm, which made him abruptly stop and be alert. A stone was in his pocket, and Hyun quickly decided that he would just go to the hospital and tell me that he had got a healing crystal, which needs to be urgently checked. Approaching the registry, the hero calmly asked where to find a nurse named Kiki. At that moment, the door suddenly opened, and the girl herself appeared on the threshold. But, to the surprise of Hyun, for an unknown reason she was in a wheelchair. The young man immediately approached her, peering carefully at her weakened face, and tried to understand what exactly happened to her and why a friend in this state. The nurse, accompanied by Kiki, explained that the girl suddenly had the ability of a hunter, and she treated patients all day without stopping, not giving her rest. Despite the fatigue, she assured that everything was in order with her. Just forces at the end. and then added that she tried to cure her sister Ha-yun, but her possibilities were not enough. The guy took out a healing crystal mined in a cave, and holding it out to the girl, said that this is a rare healing stone that could be able to help. Around the crystal, powerful energy instantly began to concentrate, turning in the air. The doctor carefully looked at the stone and confirmed that this was exactly the rare artifact that they once had. But all his reserves have long been exhausted during treatment. The people around with admiration and surprise began to ask where Ha-yun had this artifact, because such crystals were considered a real rarity, and whole queues were built behind them. Ha-yun, a little embarrassed, said that first it was necessary to check this stone in the case, and only then he would tell how he managed to get it. The nurse hastily turned around and headed away, saying that she would go for advice to those who are better versed in such rare artifacts, and wanted to go with her. However, it turned out that a friend could not leave until he completely restore her strength, because in her state, any effort could only aggravate the situation. The girl admitted that she would just want to wait for the moment of complete recovery, but she had no idea how much time it would take. At that moment, Ha-yun noticed that the system sent him a new notification, and, intrigued, decided to check what was written there. The list included one unread message, and without wasting time, he pressed the envelope icon, waiting for to see something important. Inside, there was a notification that the hero successfully completed his first portal mission, and now has the opportunity to increase the level of his partner. The next moment, the girl suddenly enveloped a powerful radiance that completely absorbed her, and she immediately felt how instantly rises to several levels. Kiki could not believe what was happening, but almost immediately realized that now he was feeling much stronger and more energetic than ever before. The girl rushed straight to the patients because she had to cure 10 more, and Ha-yun only managed to try to stop her. Suddenly behind Ha-yun, an arrogant voice rang out, which demanded that he stop, and the guy, startled, turned around. His mother, who was behind with an angry expression on his face, asked where the young man disappeared and why his clothes were all smeared with mud, as if he had just got out of some kind of trouble. The woman carefully examined her son and suddenly noticed a drop of blood on the fabric, after which anxiety flashed in her eyes. But Ha-yun quickly lied that it was just a paint from a construction site. He took a deep breath. The hero realized that he had lied to his mother, but he had no other way out, because he could not tell her the truth about his plans and the upcoming path. In fact, the guy intended to become a hunter to find Lei with his gang and avenge everything they did. In the corridor of the hospital, the vanity reigned. Doctors and nurses hastily moved about their business. Patients and their relatives were talking. Xiaohua's sister Ha-yun still lay unconscious, but an oxygen mask was already removed from her face, which meant a small but long, awaited improvement in her condition. The family, bending over the girl, lurking her breath, looked at her. Their faces expressed anxiety. And suddenly, after a few tense seconds, the young lady slowly opened her eyes. Her blurred gaze ran through the faces of loved ones. Mother, without restraining emotions, cried out joyfully. Her eyes filled with tears, and she hurried to her daughter, repeating that her precious girl finally woke up. The doctor carefully studied the indicators and said that the patient's condition is now stable. However, for complete recovery, bed rest must be observed for a few more days. Xiaohua rose weakly on the bed, looked at her brother and, in a hoarse voice, asked what happened, which Ha-yun hastily assured her that everything was in order. But they were very worried. At that moment, Kiki approached them, casting a warm look at Ha-yun. She said that it was thanks to him that his sister was safe now, because he got a healing stone from the portal, risking himself. Xiaohua pressed her palms to the temples in torture to remember events, and the terrifying paintings of how she went to school for her brother surfaced before her eyes. And then something terrible happened. The girl in horror remembered the moment when huge monsters suddenly came to her. Their predatory eyes dug into her, and the lady froze, in the realization that she was in a deadly trap. The panic constrained her, the hands themselves reached for the head, the body trembled, the memories surged with frightening power, which made her breathe, as if everything was happening right now. Father immediately bent over his daughter, hugged her shoulders, and trying to calm her, whispered that she was safe now. Nothing threatens them else. You can relax. Ha-yun clenched his fists, his lips trembled, his gaze dropped down, and his voice, full of guilt, trembled when he uttered the words, an apology. Xiaohua looked at her brother in confusion, for which he asks for forgiveness, because he could not be to blame for anything. The guy firmly replied that everything would be fine. He will always be there, and will never allow such a thing again, no matter what threat they had to resist. Kiki intervened in the conversation, saying that the brother of Xiaohua is now a real hunter for demons, and this fact cannot but cause admiration for others. The girl in amazement asked who the hunters are, and they explained to her that they are fighting with monsters, the number of which is growing. But with their appearance, the fear of monsters would soon disappear. Inspired by what he heard, Xiaohua enthusiastically stated that she wanted to become a hunter in order to protect the innocent and be useful to society. She was sure that if her stubborn brother was able to become a hunter, then she would undoubtedly be able to achieve even greater heights in this matter. Ha Yun thoughtfully replied that he had never doubted this, because his sister was always better than him in everything, and her determination proves again. When Ha Yun and Chi went out into the corridor, the girl noticed that his sister looked cheerful, and, apparently, he is really glad of how everything turned out. The guy confirmed that Xiaohua was much stronger than he could expect, and now he could only follow and not stop. Kiki asked if he plans to go to the training center for newcomers, because this is a serious step, and he needs to be confident in his decision. Ha Yun admitted that he was considering this option because Li Benhua said that this was an official institution that teaches hunters, and suggested that he join him. The girl really wanted to go with him, but the fear of patients with whom she helped did not give her rest, so the lady decided to stay and continue to treat people. Kiki suggested that Ha Yun go to study alone, and then, when he was gaining experience, he taught her everything that she would learn at the Center of Training of Hunters. The guy nodded, waved her goodbye to her, and promised to find out from the teachers if it was possible to undergo training in a remote format so that she could join later. After that, the young man left the hospital, went down the wide steps down, and, taking a deep breath, stepped towards the new chapter of his life. Although he was already 18 years old, his mother, just in case, signed all the necessary documents so that he did not have problems with admission. However, passing the check, Ha Yun decided to cheat a little and indicated that he was not 18 yet. Supposedly 2 months were left before his birthday. Suddenly, a magnificent building was opened in front of him, the Center for Training Hunters. The young man barely stopped at the entrance, and then walked on. He had a plan in his head. The hero thought about how the world had changed. Now the tests could be passed right on the street, in mobile laboratories, as if in some kind of futuristic film. With these thoughts, he moved on, not looking back, rushing forward towards the white glow, breaking through at the end of the dark tunnel. Suddenly, Ha Yun's gaze attracted something amazing, and the guy froze in amazement, unable to look away from what was happening in front of him. There were many people in front of him, who looked very strange, but most of them held a weapon in their hands, as if they were preparing for battle at any moment. So this is what the place where the hunters gather together like. The place of power and danger, where everyone present knows why he is here. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of Ha Yun, whose incredibly powerful muscles gave out in him a warrior hardened in the battles. The guy raised his head up because this man was incredibly high. His figure towered, and inspired respect as well as fear. The hunter, with icy calm in his voice, asked if the newcomer had any problems, looking at him intently. Ha Yun barely restrained delight. His voice trembled slightly when he muttered that he had absolutely no problem. The hunter squinted and asked why the guy then doesn't understand what kind of place it is and what rules are in him. The young man firmly replied that he was well aware of where he was, and came exactly where he should, without the slightest doubt. Their intense conversation was suddenly interrupted by a luxurious girl who loudly called out a powerful warrior named Taishan and ordered him not to scare people with her formidable look. The formidable hunter instantly changed his face expression, becoming benevolent, and apologized to the guy, explaining that he simply wanted to know if he needed help in this place. The girl sternly noticed that Taishan should sit behind the counterpart and not walk in the center, distracting visitors and creating unnecessary stress. The hunter complained that it was too crowded here, and he wanted to grieve, so he rose. But this argument did not make the proper impression on the boss. A strict lady emphasized that its appearance leaves much to be desired. You should wear a uniform, as expected. Taishan was embarrassed and muttered that the costume turned out to be too small. The boss sharply ordered at least to put on a tie so that visitors realized that they were in front of them, and not another tramp. Suppressing a sigh, Taishan took a pink tie, picked it up on his neck, and dutifully said that he understood everything. Not wanting to continue the dispute with the boss, Ha Yun, in disgust, watched how this thug now looked even more ridiculous than before. Meanwhile, the girl turned to the hero and asked why he came to the center, intending to find out what exactly brought him here. To his great regret, Ha Yun discovered that now this strict lady scares him much more than Taishan himself, and he felt uneasy. Soon, the boss led the newcomer on the corridor, with the intention of finding out Did he really go into the portal? And only then learned about his hunter's abilities. Ha-Yun confirmed that everything was so. The guy almost died, but at the last moment Mr. Lee intervened and saved him. Miss Wu noticed that the guy was incredibly lucky that Lee Benhua was nearby at that moment. Ha-Yun was surprised and asked if they were really familiar. The young lady replied that they once worked together. But then something happened, and Lee Benhua took responsibility to check the ability of hunters. The girl remembered that Lee told about Ha-Yun, because at first he did not find any abilities in him. But after leaving the portal they suddenly appeared. The guy looked a little bewildered and admitted that he himself did not understand how this could happen, because apparently his level increased precisely during his stay in the portal. The boss explained that physical activity can really affect the growth of the level, but in such a short time, it is impossible to sharply become a real strong hunter. Ha-Yun came to the conclusion that he was probably just a very weak beginner who still has a lot to learn. The girl noted that from the moment of the appearance of monsters in the world, more strange and inexplicable phenomena have begun to occur, which no one can explain yet. Finally, they went to the door, and the boss, turning around, with a good-natured smile, noticed that the hunters were constantly collecting data around the world in order to better prepare for the fight against threat. After these words, she opened the door and added that, of course, young hunters will teach to understand all this. The next moment, the director entered the spacious office, where many people were already sitting at the desks, ready to start training. The lady confidently invited everyone to take her places, as she was going to start a new lesson, and Ha-Yun was still standing next to her. She indicated to the young man that he could take any free place and start classes with everyone. Ha-Yun sat down at the desk, but he did not leave the strange feeling that he had already met this woman somewhere before. Meanwhile, the lady introduced herself to the group, calling for Wu Yuanzuan, and added that from now on it would be their mentor in this training center. And only now the amazed guy realized why her face seemed so acquaintance to him. Once in his former school, her was the 5th size. These words almost fell off his lips, but the guy could not resist, while other students had already begun to look in surprise in his direction. Wu Yuanquan turned directly to him, asking with a slight smile to ask if the hero studied earlier at secondary school Jinpen. Ha-Yun, still dumbfounded, confirmed that this was really so, and the woman nodded, hinting that she remembers him well. Then she slowly came closer. Their eyes met for a few moments, and the guy felt that this lesson could be much more complicated than expected. The young lady calmly stated that she really once taught chemistry, but this does not mean at all that now he can turn to her with such a nickname. Ha-Yun felt awkwardness and admitted that he simply did not think about it before, and his gaze rushed about the room in search of salvation from the gaze of a woman. However, the girl was not going to let go of the situation, approached closely and firmly stated that she would not allow anyone to make this nickname aloud. The young man was instantly covered with evaporates and hastily apologized. Wu Yuanquan turned sharply and headed to the center of the hall, and Ha-Yun exhaled with relief. It was possible to avoid even more shame. Once this woman was just a teacher, but now she is a real hunter and has incredible abilities. In her lady, she focused on incredibly strong energy. Wu Yuanzuan demonstrated its skills, smoothly balancing fire and water between the two elements. Her movements were light and at the same time impeccably accurate and coordinated. At some point, the whirlwind of fire and cold grew to giant sizes, filling the entire space and causing real delight and anxiety. The students in a panic jumped up from their places, fearing that magical energy would get out of control, and tried to find at least some shelter in the hall. Fire and water whistled space with a whirlwind, completely covering the room. The students in amazement watched this incredible sight, unable to look away. Ha-Yun enthusiastically watched what was happening, because seeing such a powerful combination of elements performed by one person seemed unthinkable and struck his imagination. The girl confidently said that in fact, magic and chemistry are closely connected, because both are the chemical reactions that occur during the interaction of various elements. One of the students admitted that she had previously considered such magic, but now, after the explanation of Miss Wu, she was able to look at this phenomenon from a scientific point of view. The teacher warned the class that it is impossible to use the hunter's abilities thoughtlessly, because their effective use requires a deep understanding of the processes. For example, in order to competently control its strength, it is necessary to learn how to control the release of adrenaline, because it is he who plays a key role in activating abilities. Ha-Yun listened carefully to every word, trying to realize how great the level of preparation of his new teacher, and what opportunities she can reveal to them. Suddenly, the system interface broke out in front of the young man, and he was surprised to see that the level of Miss Wu is 52, which turned out to be even lower than Li Benhua. The system instantly proposed adding this person to his team, and Hai Yun reached for the button, with the intention of immediately taking advantage of the chance. However, to his disappointment, the hero found that the button was not pressed for an unknown reason. When the guy leaned closer to the screen, he noticed that under the button, another text was hidden, which said that to add this person you need to perform a quest. The name of the quest was to increase the level of relations with the hunter, and Hai Yun thought for a few moments, in torture, to understand how to fulfill this task. This task was quite unclear, and the young hero could not immediately figure out how he had to increase this relationship. He plunged into deep thoughts, not noticing how the clot of blue energy crept up to him, which was approaching at an incredible speed. The next moment, Hai Yun with horror felt a powerful effect that suddenly enveloped him. Wu Yuanzuan noticed that this is the usual fate of those who do not listen to her carefully during the lessons, and now the guy received his reward. After that, the girl with a mockery asked if the newcomer really entertained with herself, not paying attention to her words. The mocking views of other students rushed to Hai Yun, and at that moment he was so ashamed that the young man was ready to fall through the ground. At this time, the formidable words of the teacher were heard in the hall, ordering him to stay after the lesson in order to figure out what happened. Hai Yun blushed with tension, and now he understood that his level of relationship with this woman had just worsened significantly. For some time, Hai Yun was subjected to exhausting training, in which Miss Wu demanded that he force adrenaline to pour into his blood and arouse his energy. Finally, exhausted, the guy fell on all fours and admitted that he was very tired and could no longer continue training. The girl clarified that the beginner really does not want to become a hunter, because, as you can call yourself one if you can't even complete such a simple task. Hai Yun replied that he could, but only when he faces a real danger, as it was the last time, when his life was at risk. Wu Yuanzuan noted that a real professional should be able to use his abilities at any time. The young man admitted that he is already trying his best. At this time, the girl went to the wall of the weapon and said that Hai Yun should choose the weapon with which she would feel an emotional connection. This phrase puzzled the young man. What else is the connection with the weapon? Whether the subject can have some kind of emotion? Wu Yuanzuan angrily asked for who he is taking their team. The lady explained that the guy should have a connection with the weapon so that it helps him, but was not stronger than the hero himself. After that, Wu Yuanzuan recalled how in the portal Li Benhua killed monsters with the help of one pen, and an ordinary person would prefer to take a more convenient weapon to fight. If Li Benhua has willpower and self-confidence to fight even a pen, he will do it, because for him there is no obstacle to the choice of weapons. Wu Yuanquan, although reluctantly, admitted that Li Benhua is much stronger than her, that she was forced to take into account this, despite her pride. Hai Yun asked why, in this case, Li Benhua did not fight, but simply conducts tests for hunters if his forces are so great. The young lady was a little sad and noticed that before Li Benhua was on the front line, but at one point something happened that changed his life. Miss Wu interrupted herself, quickly adding that if once whether Benhua decides to tell him the whole truth, he will do it himself. Then she asked Hai Yun whether he chose a weapon, because in addition to this, you need to choose his characteristic, for example, a hunter class. This turned out to be difficult to perceive for the young man. He scratched his head, restraining the laughter, and the teacher, angry, explained that she needed to choose a class, attacking or defender. Hai Yun thought, and then replied that he was probably suitable for close combat class, because the last time he fought with monsters with a kitchen knife and a stool. Wu Yuanquan stared at the guy, shocked by his words. Could not believe that he had fought with monsters a stool. Looking around a little, Hai Yun explained that he did not have time to choose a weapon, so he took the first thing that came to his arm, the girl thought, thinking that Hai Yun really looked like Benhua, holding a stool in her hands. On the other hand, doubts crept into her soul, because it cannot be that the young man would be so strong, and probably despair only gave him more energy. Miss Wu insisted that in any case, Hai Yun chose a nearby weapon and tested it in business, because this is the only way to test your strength. Hai Yun thoughtfully examined the wall, hung with various blades and swords, not knowing what to choose, because he never used weapons and did not know where to start. The guy thought that if his younger sister was in his place, she would probably choose the bow and arrows, because it always interested her most. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the scalpel, and he thought about whether it was also a weapon or just a tool for treatment. It would have chosen for himself. Wu Yuanzuan, meanwhile, asked why Hai Yun decided to become a hunter, because he did not look like an adventurer. And this embarrassed her. Hai Yun scratched his head and said that he became a hunter to get therapeutic crystals and earn money, because his sister was in a coma, and he hoped to help her. The guy added that now his sister is in order, because he found the right crystal, and now his family is safe, which became the main goal for him. The teacher suggested that in this case, Hai Yun had no more reason to be a hunter, because his goal has already been achieved, and everything he wanted, now he had. Hai Yun first thought about it, because his sister is now in order, and therefore he really no longer needs to be a hunter. But deep down, the young hero still longed to become useful to this world, and wanted to find his place, to justify his aspirations. The guy admitted that he could not accurately explain his reason, but he just needs to become a hunter. It was his desire that cannot be ignored. Wu Yuanzuan advised him to find his true reason, because only then he will be able to activate the ability and possibly to reveal all his potential. Suddenly, Hai Yun noticed something strange at the door, and warily asked that it could be, attracting the teacher's attention to an unusual phenomenon. The girl cast a sharp look in the direction where her student pointed, and her expression instantly became wary. Incredibly powerful energy emanated from there. The next second, everything happened very quickly. Wu Yuanzuan reached out to Hai Yun with horror, trying to protect him from an impending threat. The guy felt her grabbing him, blocking his body from a possible blow, not allowing him to suffer from this powerful power. Incredible power fell on them directly from the door, created a powerful stream of energy that hit their bodies, and left the heroes in complete shock. When it all ended and the dust lay down, Hai Yun noticed that Miss Wu was wounded. Her condition seemed serious after what had just happened. The girl said that everything was in order, but she insisted that it was necessary to leave this building as soon as possible, because the situation became more and more dangerous. Hai Yun suggested that evil monsters could hide behind the door, and it was extremely dangerous, because the guy did not know that he was waiting ahead. But unexpectedly, from there, some kind of stifled scream was heard, and friends instantly froze. The young man suggested that someone could cry or just scream, but his partner, without blinking an eye, looked right in front of her and thought about something. And then, Wu Yuanzuan rushed to run and shouted to the guy to call Taisha and said that it was necessary to evacuate people to the center of hunters. Hai Yun tried to stop the teacher, warning her that it was impossible to go there until help arrives, because their actions could lead to even greater problems. But the girl resolutely stated that if they want to break out, then she is ready to detain the monsters, despite all the danger that this could lead. As soon as the monsters begin to act, the lady could not predict what consequences it would have, and what harm they could do. In the head of the young hero again, the memories of his wounded sister resumed, and meanwhile, the teacher was already rapidly rushing into the abyss. Not looking back, the young man dialed the number and called Taishan, saying that a portal appeared in the training room. The guy remembered Li Benhua that when someone enters the portal, he could not be opened outside. It turned out to be especially relevant in the current situation. Hai Yun abruptly broke and said that it was necessary to immediately send reinforcement and evacuate the rest in order to avoid further losses and threats. After that, the young hero took the first weapon that he came across, ready to act, despite the danger. Hai Yun went forward and caught up with his teacher, who stared at him in surprise, and why this student followed her. Wu Yuanquan was very angry and asked why he ran after her, because it was extremely dangerous, and even in excess of a broom with him. Hai Yun was at confusion and did not know what to answer. In the turmoil, he did not even pay attention, and now he understood how ridiculous it looked. Suddenly, the light went out, and Miss Wu picked up a flashlight to light the road, since the situation became more dangerous, and it was necessary to be prepared for surprises. The girl was in complete indignation, wondering if this short, flowered one took with him just an ordinary broom when a real weapon was required to protect. The hero admitted that he thought that it was some kind of weapon, and grabbed the first thing he fell by the arm, not paying attention to his real purpose. Wu Yuanzuan remembered the guy's words that he was an ordinary newcomer without special skills, but it is strange why he still ran after her, despite his inexperience. After that, turning around sharply, Miss Wu said with irritation that there would be one frost with him, since his actions only complicated their situation. The young man admitted that Li Benhua remembered that as soon as they opened the portal, he could not be opened outside, and he simply could not leave the teacher in danger. The girl was in wild rage and exclaimed that now they had only one thing left, to die here, if the situation gets out of control, and help. Hai Yun asked if Teacher Wu really has some kind of plan about this. The lady said that she did not want to go too far. but just was going to stand here and wait until she arrived on the outside. The young man belligerently said that in this case, he would wait here with his teacher, preparing for the struggle for survival. Wu Yuanquan said that they would fight to death so as not to repeat the tragedy that happened at the portal alone. The hero became interested in this story and asked what happened to the #1 portal. And the lady replied that this was the first abyss that opened. Then they still did not have enough experience, and people simply started a bloody battle, not realizing that they had to face an incredible threat. At first, everyone was afraid to enter the portal. No one dared to take this step, despite the obvious threat and the unknown that emanated from this mysterious entrance. But then monsters began to appear from the portal, which led to huge victims and incredible devastation. When the monsters began to destroy everything in their path, people needed great efforts to drive these creatures back into their measurement. But even then, despite all the efforts, the consequences remained catastrophic. Hai Yun could not believe that Miss Wu participated in the first battle. The young lady said that he and Li Benhua simply passed by, and accidentally were drawn into this battle, and did not know that everything would turn into this way. The young man enthusiastically noticed that in this case, the teacher Wu and Li Benhua was the first to receive the abilities of hunters, which sounded truly and incredibly for him. The girl admitted that then, at those moments, she did not quite understand what happened, as if a golden luminous thread pierced them and made them special. This feeling was so unusual, as if they were surrounded by gold silk. And it was then that their incredible abilities appeared that the hunters now used. Hai Yun remembered his escape, and realized that he saw a similar light at the moment when his life was at risk. And it seemed that a huge fire-breathing dragon stood behind him. The young lady continued to tell that later organizations of hunters who began to gain experience appeared. But there were much more portals, which brought new challenges. Recent studies have shown that all this happened because of the first opened portal, which became the reference point for all subsequent events and destruction. Hai Yun in surprise asked for whether this is really the very first door that was once opened. And was she really at the school from the very beginning? The lady shook her head negatively, explaining that the first abyss appeared not here at all, but in the square, becoming a starting point for all subsequent events. The young man exhaled, because now some moments in his head began to clear up. Wu Yuanquan noticed his strange reaction and asked what happened. But the guy, a little embarrassed, hastened to assure her that everything was in order. The teacher began to talk about the first portal, clarified the details, but suddenly her words were interrupted by a loud piercing scream that came in the dark. The girl quickly lit a sound source with a flashlight, and her gaze instantly became tense and focused. Hai Yun noticed that this frightening sound was approaching, and something else was moving with it, although he could not yet make out what was hiding in the dark. Miss Wu hid the phone in her neckline to hold it closer, and at the same time free her hands, prepared for a possible attack. The young lady ordered Hai Yun to stay next to the door, and in no case do not get involved in a fight. And if something happens, immediately open the portal and run out. And then, even more severely, she added that if the guy decides to go with her, she would only hurt, and therefore his main task, not to expose himself to risk. The hero froze, and felt the words freeze in his throat, because listening was simply unbearable. But even worse to realize his powerlessness. The young hero in despair turned to the system and, without hesitation, pressed a button that allowed him to join the team in order to somehow influence the situation. Mentally, Hai Yun begged the teacher to allow him to join the battle, because he was sure that he could be useful and, possibly, even save someone. If the young man is with her in the same team, then the system will automatically increase the level of Miss Wu, which will give her additional advantages in battle. Meanwhile, a loud cry of help rang out of the darkness. Someone called a young lady with all his might, and this voice sounded too desperately. Wu Yuanzuan froze for a few moments, because what she heard was confused by this voice was familiar, but she could not believe it. Hai Yun in a panic asked if it was really a human voice, but the girl only nodded because he clearly called her by name. However, when the lady was going to move forward, the young man resolutely blocked her path, recalling that they did not know what was hiding there, and you can't take risks. The lady was confused, because over the entire existence of the abyss was the first monster who knew how to speak. Hai Yun agreed that it was really frightening, but added that perhaps the creature simply repeats the words heard earlier, not understanding their meaning. The girl thought about his words and admitted that this is quite logical, because it is possible that some monsters have the ability to repeat what they heard. But the next moment, something even more strange. A voice called her nicknamed the Fifth Size, which put the girl in complete confusion. Hai Yun immediately stated that he certainly did not say this, which means that an unknown voice was really able to consciously turn to her. Meanwhile, the voice did not stop, continuing to call for help, and Miss Wu was already standing on the steps, wondering what to do next. But after a moment, she resolutely broke off, because she was sure that this was called a student who, perhaps, fell into a trap. Without hesitation for a second, Wu Yuanzuan rushed to the rescue, shouting in response that she was already going and would soon be in place. Hai Yun could not just let her go, so he hurried after her, begging to return and not to do any rash acts. However, Wu Yuanzuan no longer listened to him. She rushed down the steps right into the darkness, from where the calling voice came. The girl was sure that it was impossible to take risks in such a situation, because if it is really a student, he needs to urgently save him. And then she reminded the young man how Manhwa himself, when she rushed into the portal to save him, the young man thought about her words and realized that this is really so. Because if Mr. Lee had not come then, that guy would have probably died. She was right, because if there is at least the slightest chance to save a person, they definitely need to use. However, despite all this, Hai Yun understood that he could not leave his teacher alone in such a dangerous situation. Therefore, he rushed forward after Wu Yuanzuan, who had already disappeared into the dark, rushing down. At that moment, the young man was seized with heat, and it seemed that his body completely plunged into the raging flame, but he did not retreat. Waving a broom, the guy tried to scare away the enemies and even warned the monsters loudly so that they stayed away from him. However, the next moment, right in front of Wanzuan, creepy creatures with predatory eyes and long claws appeared from the darkness. Hai Yun decisively screamed, ordering Miss Wu to take refuge immediately, while he himself delayed them. And he himself, without waiting for an answer, rushed forward, dissecting the air. Feeling his heart pounded frantically from tension, he squeezed his weapons tightly in his hands and prepared for the upcoming fierce battle. There was no longer back. Wu Yuanquan was already activating the fiery attack. Her gaze was harsh, and she was ready to destroy anyone who would stand in her way. When the monsters retreated a little, the passage was opened in front of them, leading further deep into the mysterious and gloomy corridor. The girl quickly looked around and realized that a dead end awaits them ahead, and the only way out to go downstairs was not too late. Then she abruptly demanded an explanation why this naughty guy got up after her again. Hai Yun, not hesitating, said that he could not leave her because he had to protect his teacher, no matter what. Wu Yuanquan sighed, abandonedly throwing that he was the worst student whom she had ever met in her life. But the young man was confident in his actions. Together, they had much more chances to survive. The hero ironically promised that if they survive, she could invite his parents to school for a serious conversation. Meanwhile, Taishan had already arrived at the scene and immediately tried to get through to the familiar number. However, there was no connection, which means that Miss Wu really entered the portal and was there in complete solitude. And this guy also disappeared with her. Did he really go there? Taishan grinned and muttered that he was just a student. The man calmly told the rest that he was left to wait. They will return alive, either dead, and in any case, perhaps, someone from them will be able to survive, and the portal will have to open. Dramateered but still ready for battle, Wu Yuanzuan and Hai Yun carefully went down, and the guy noticed that the tentacles had disappeared, as if they had never been. However, the lady frowned that such creatures could not just disappear. They lurked in anticipation of the moment for a new attack. The young man, barely holding his breath, admitted that he needed at least a few moments to restore strength and recover. Wu Yuanzuan smiled slyly and noticed that her student was not so bad. He activated the power of the hunter and attacked with the help of a broom. Hai Yun thought, because everything happened so quickly, that the guy did not even have time to realize exactly how he managed to use his hidden power. The teacher frowned and admitted that she clearly underestimated him, because the guy had a potential exceeding her expectations. The hero decided to test his abilities, and a system screen with an important notice suddenly broke out before his eyes. The message said that the young man increased the level of relationship with the hunter and can now add him to his team. While Wan Yunzuan was suspicious with the surrounding space, Hai Yun barely restrained joy. Finally did it. Now, Teacher Wu officially became his partner, and together they created a team with incredible power. Suddenly, in front of Hai Yun, several notifications surfaced at once, flickering so quickly that he did not have time to read them and figure out what was happening. Soon the young man realized that he had accumulated affordable experience points that can be spent on improving the abilities of his allies. In addition, the hero found that he could spend points on himself, but quickly came to the conclusion that this may not be the most reasonable solution. Hai Yun reasoned that the best option is to put glasses in the Wu teacher. because it is much stronger and could help get out of the portal. However, if he leaves himself without improvements, he will become too weak in the team, and this also does not bode well. In addition, the guy still has not raised his level, so it would be most logical to share the experience between them equally. When the decision was made, the young man without hesitation pressed the button to spend and rightly distributed available points. The next moment, his body was illuminated by the bright fiery light, which instantly swept it, filling each muscle with energy. Feeling a sudden impact, Ha-Yun shuddered in surprise and staggered back with a cry, but soon he realized that he was now filled with incredible force. That's the feeling of a real increase in level. Now it is time to increase the level of Miss Wu, because with renewed vigor, it could become even more powerful and help to get out of the portal. The young man quickly pressed the desired button to spend the remaining experience points on his mentor. The guy watched Wanzuan tensely, in anticipation of how her transformation will pass and what will change in abilities. Soon he noticed that blue energy began to flow around the girl, completely enveloping it with a silhouette. According to all the laws of the system, the level of the teacher was to instantly increase, making it much more. However, with unexpected disappointment, Ha-Yun found that her indicator remained unchanged and did not advance forward at all. The guy in confusion grabbed his head and did not understand why nothing happened, because the glasses were spent. Wu Yuan-Quan approached him sharply, looked carefully into her eyes, and asked why the young man spoke to himself so loudly. A little embarrassed, Ha-Yun muttered that he simply thought over the strategy of the troops, because sometimes in tense moments it was difficult to remain silent. However, his excuses were not convinced by the mentor, who frowned at what the army could be if there are only 2 teams. In his excuse, Ha-Yun muttered that he simply gave free rein and invented everything on the go. In torture at least somehow smoothed the situation. However, the girl seriously stated that now is not the time to talk, go upstairs, which means that there was only one to go back. The guy was surprised, because the lady herself wanted to save the students, so why now she offers to retreat? Wu Yuanzuan coldly said that she was not sure whether this voice was real, but she knew one for sure, Ha-Yun Real, and she was not going to lose him. The young man firmly stated that he was able to fight, just Miss Wu has not yet seen him in a real battle, and does not know what he is really capable of. However, the mentor calmly objected that the difference in their combat skills is too great, because the guy only stuns the enemies, and she can destroy them. The hero lowered his head and realized the truth of her words, because between the 22nd and 52nd levels, there was a huge abyss. Meanwhile, Wu Yuanzuan had already concentrated 2 powerful elements in her hands, and ordered the young man to stay behind to get up. Ha-Yun was silent intensely. Many contradictory emotions raged in his soul. The guy stepped after, torn by different feelings, but he simply had no other way out of except to obey. Climbing the stairs, he noticed that the wound on the back of Miss Wu could still hurt, and his face reflected a slight alarm. The girl calmly said that she should not remind her of the wound, because everything had already happened, and nothing can be changed. The human brain is arranged so that it forgets about pain, but it is worth remembering it how unpleasant sensations return with renewed vigor. She mechanically squeezed her shoulder, but still tried not to show that the wound still causes discomfort. Ha-Yun apologized and noticed that if he went ahead, then Miss Wu would have more effort to fight. However, the mentor unexpectedly cut him off in a half-tongue and ordered him to shut up, because there was clearly something strange ahead. The guys peered wary into the thick darkness, from which an unknown creature could appear at any moment. They carefully moved forward and tried to move silently, and their eyes were full of tension. The tentacles were lying on the stairs, who looked lifeless and did not move at all, as if they were dead. Wu Yuanzuan remembered that during the descent down they destroyed a lot of tentacles. But after that, there were no new attacks. Ha-Yun came to the conclusion that perhaps these tentacles served as an obstacle, and now the passage was finally free. There were too many severed limbs around, but those that really died were used to block the passage, and the living still tried to attack. However, if their number is not endless, then there is a real chance to destroy them all and clear the way forward. The girl released a powerful stream of fire in the lane and ordered Ha-Yuna to stay in the rear while she dealt with enemies. The young man agreed, because after a recent increase in the level, he became much easier to activate his abilities. Wu Yuanzuan did not hesitate for a second and immediately went on the offensive, using one of her most powerful attacks. As soon as the fire paved the way, she shouted Ha-Yun so that he moved faster forward and would not lag behind. The hero made a sharp jump up and a dazzling flame flashed around him, illuminating the space. But the very next moment, something unexpected, guys, suddenly happened to fall down rapidly. At the same moment, Wanzuan released another fiery stream, trying to soften its fall. Hai Yun barely managed to land on the steps, but ran into them so unsuccessfully that he painfully hit his knees. Hai Yun, with annoyance, noted that the exit was again blocked. In front of him lay piles of severed limbs, blocking the path to salvation. Covering in anger, the young man accelerated forward and without hesitation rushed directly into the trap placed by enemies. Waving his weapons, he attacked with rage, while Wu Yuanquan struck with dazzling magic rays. However, the next moment, something unexpected happened, and both frozen in amazement in place, not believing their eyes. The giant tentacles, as if reviving, set in motion and rushed straight towards them, forcing Hai Yun to rush forward. But Wu Yuanquan considered his impulse too risky and realized that they needed to break up and not get involved in battle. Realizing the whole danger of the situation, the heroes decided to retreat and quickly began to go down the stairs. Miss Wu could not understand why the enemies became more and more, and why their attacks became more powerful every time. However, the next unexpected discovery was even more frightening. One of the tentacles grabbed her, preventing him from freeing herself. Without hesitation for a second, Hai Yun sharply waved his hand, directed the attack on the target, and thereby instantly freed his mentor. The young lady was amazed at how this student managed to use the splitting technique, although before that she did not even suspect his abilities. Hai Yun looked at her in bewilderment, because he first heard this word and did not know any technician at all. The girl explained that recently they studied a new technique, the essence of which was to dissect the monster into small parts, and thereby win. She admitted that she herself had not yet mastered this skill completely, while Hai Yun flawlessly performed this complex trick. The next moment, the system unexpectedly confirmed her words, sending a notice of unlocked ability called Easter Splitting. A little embarrassed, the hero grinned and said that he was probably able to fulfill this technique simply because he was a born genius. However, in order to change the subject, the young man asked Miss Wu whether she was heard yet by the cries of help that had previously come from the depths of the tunnel. The girl suddenly realized that she had not heard these desperate voices for a long time, which seemed extremely suspicious to her. It seems that it was a trap. As soon as the guys fell into it, the ghostly screams instantly disappeared, left behind only silence. But suddenly, from the depths of the dark tunnel, muffled cries and pleas of salvation came again, which made friends strain. Now it became clear that the voice was returning, and it was not a cunning deception or a trap of monsters, but a real cry of a person who fell into trouble. Hai Yun froze in a daze, and did not understand why this voice only began to hear, and what was happening in this strange place. The guy strained the rumor, but still could not make out the words, although without a doubt this voice belonged to a living person who called for help. Wu Yuanquan confidently stated that the voice repeats the same thing, "I am here," and she heard it completely clearly, without any distortion. The girl wondered how many floors they had already overcome down, because a lot of time passed since the escape, and the stairs did not end. Hai Yun grinned and noticed that the staircase looks endless, which means that she might not have the first floor at all. The young man suggested that they fell into one of the myths about the ancient traps, but did not manage to develop the thought because he immediately received a slap. Wu Yuanquan annoyed him not to carry nonsense, because they are in the monster den, and not in an ancient legend. Hai Yun thought, what was happening really looked too unrealistic, as if torn out of sleep or illusion. The girl suddenly remembered that along the way, they did not find a single crystal confirming their location, and Hai Yun agreed. Miss Wu continued to reason, claiming that crystals are a source of monsters' energy, and their absence in the portal means that someone carefully protects them. To check this, you should turn off the flashlight and look down, which Hai Yun did, in the hope of finding something unusual. Below, the brilliant pebbles flashed, probably those very precious crystals on which the whole power of the inhabitants of the portal was based. It was there that the monster settled, as well as the one who called for the help, so the heroes had no other choice but to go down. They decided to go down a few more floors down, preparing for a new battle with those who were hiding in the dark. Suddenly, a system notification appeared before Hai Yun, who reported that only 5 meters were left to the goal. But he did not have time to figure out what this means. The guy cried out in horror and warned of an impending threat, but did not have time to complete the phrase. In the next instant, a huge paw of the monster with incredible force hit them, knocking them down and sending them to a free fall. The heroes landed heavily, covered by the shock from what happened, the realization that they clearly underestimated the danger. Miss Wu looked around and noted that there was a pitch darkness around. asked how Ha-yun was able to foresee the attack. The young man thought, assuming that with an increase in the level, he opened many new abilities, which he did not know about. However, aloud the guy did not say this, only shrugged and stated that he may have just an excellent intuition. At the same moment, the hero made a firm decision to go ahead to first meet enemies and defend his partner. Miss Wu hesitated because he was an inexperienced newcomer who was used to rushing into battle without thinking about tactics. Ha-yun argued his decision by the fact that the teacher could attack at a distance of 10 meters, and he owned an exclusively near battle. Such a distribution of positions gave them a certain advantage. The young man fights in the front row, and she controls the situation from the rear. The girl sarcastically noticed that they were not a real detachment, but the guy only smiled and said that even two could fight like a single team. Wu Yuanquan thought, because the hunters in real battle always lined up in operation, but in their case, everything was different. The guy insisted that this was their only opportunity to cope with the enemy, and suggested at least to try. After short thoughts, the girl agreed, deciding that this plan should be tested because they still had no other way out. Finally, the heroes moved forward, gently making his way along the dark corridor, who went down like a bottomless abyss, which drags into the unknown. Ha-yun was thinking about his new skill, trying to understand how reliable he was, because the warning about the attack appeared only 5 meters before the enemy. He needed to find out the radius of activation of the ability in order to use it in the future with maximum efficiency in battle. Opening the system menu, the young man was surprised to find two values. One indicated 3 meters, and the other 9, which even more confused him. Suddenly, the guy sharply raised his head and warned that the monsters were approaching, gave the command to prepare for the attack. In less than a fraction of a second, huge tentacles burst out of the darkness, rushing right at them, trying to grab and tear to pieces. Wu Yuanquan quickly assessed the situation and realized that the guy counted a little and instantly released a pillar of fire forward. At the same time, Ha-yun deftly operated on his broom, which, covered with flame, drawn in the air fiery arcs. A bright flash lit up the space. The heroes stepped back, and the monster was trapped, covered by a raging flame. The girl took her breath with relief and asked her partner if he was all right after this swift attack. The guy smiled self-confidently and stated that everything was fine with him, and then asked with a grin, was he not an ideal commander? However, Miss Wu did not give rest another thought, as the student found out that there would be 2 monsters, and that it was from this side to wait for the attack. Looking into his eyes, the girl resolutely asked if he could somehow feel the presence of monsters nearby. Squinting mysteriously, she muttered that this guy is very interesting, and it was worth better to study his abilities after returning. Then, having fun laughing, the lady said that now it is most important for them to get out of here as soon as possible. After some time, the heroes continued the path, and the girl, without losing vigilance, directed 2 elements forward at once. They carefully descended the stairs, and their steps surrendered with a muffled echo. Ha-yun suddenly lit up the space in front of him, and stunnedly said that something incredible was waiting for them ahead. To their amazement, the passage was not faced with the guys. An impassable stone wall towered, blocking the further path. It was simply impossible. Where then the monster, crystals, and the person who called for help disappeared? Ha-yun activated his improved vision, and the first guesses about what was happening in this mysterious place began to take shape in his head. Having carefully examined the wall, he noticed strange signs emitting an ominous red light, as if warning about danger. The guy instantly reacted and ordered Miss Wu to stay away. But the girl looked at him bewildered and did not understand what happened. A warning was displayed in the system, an 8-meter threat. It was incredible, because the danger was clearly hiding right in front of them. Without hesitation, Ha-yun said that it was urgent to leave, since this strange wall began to move in their direction. They rushed to run, but behind the rumble of destruction was already heard. Massive stone blocks showered, opening something terrible. Among the wreckage, giant tentacles appeared, who wriggled and rushed directly to the heroes with a frightening speed. It was really scary. With every second, the monster became more and more, filling the whole space. Ha-yun quickly assessed the situation and offered to go upstairs, because they simply could not cope with such a growing monster. However, Miss Wu said that this is impossible since the passage up is now blocked. At that moment, everything became clear. The monster drove them into a trap, forcing them to go down, and then blocked them to retreat. It was a cunning delay strategy. He was not going to let them go, which means that his friends had the only option, to fight. In a desperate attempt to find a way out, Ha-yun opened the system, hoping to find at least one acceptable way to escape. The option appeared in the list of possible actions. Add 511 experience points. The guy pressed the button. Having spent 900 points, he instantly climbed 20 levels, and then, having invested another 500, received only 3 additional. It was strange. It became obvious that the higher the level, the more resources it is required to increase it, which explained why the young man could not strengthen Miss Wu. But the most amazing was another. A new function called the store opened before him. Having become interested, the guy pressed one of the crystals that suddenly appeared on the screen. It turned out to be a universal strengthening crystal, a temporary consumable that doubles for 10 seconds. Hai Yun quickly realized that such an artifact could be useful in battle, and without hesitation, grabbed it. The young man instantly took the crystal, clutching him tightly in his palm, in the hope that he will help to get out of this nightmare. Suddenly, the land underfoot, and they began to rapidly fall down. At the last moment, the guy managed to extend his hand, passing the crystal of Wu Yuan Zuan, and the girl instinctively grabbed him. She looked at the subject with surprise, and did not understand what exactly he was and why she needed. At that moment, Hai Yun felt a lot of slippery, cold tentacles wrapped around his body, firmly holding in a trap. They completely absorbed it, leaving only one free hand outside. In despair, the young man heard a familiar voice calling Miss Wu, asking for help, but now everything was different. It was the same voice that she heard earlier, and now the hero understood how skillfully the monster manipulated them. However, awareness came too late. The young man had already fallen into the abyss, continuing to hear the pleas of salvation. The trap was perfectly placed. The monster made them believe in deception, and now the teacher should not listen to these words. Meanwhile, the girl in horror extended her hand forward, desperately trying to grab her partner, but it was too late. After some time, Hai Yun came to his senses, sitting among the torn tentacles, who now lay around. Wu Yuanquan leaned uneasily and asked if everything was fine with him, but he only dumbfoundedly asked what happened, as the hero was here and what happened to the monster. The lady explained that she could not get him out of the clutches of the monster, so she opened the portal and called for help. He looked in surprise at the remains of the creature. Did Yuanquan really destroy him? The girl admitted that she used a crystal that she had never seen before, and was struck by his strength. This artifact turned out to be incredibly powerful, enhancing a person to an unimaginable level. Hai Yun smiled joyfully, realizing that this was the only chance of salvation, and they used it. They almost reached the first floor, although it seemed that this descent lasted an eternity. Wu Yuanquan thoughtfully remarked that the voice that his friends heard was just a trick, which means that the monster could read their thoughts. Now Hai Yun understood that his voice appeared only after he himself began to suspect something was amiss, and before that only Wan Zuan heard him. In addition, this unknown call for some reason called it the nickname the Fifth Size, which seemed especially strange. Their conversation was unexpectedly interrupted by Taishan, saying that now is not the time for discussion. First, you need to clean the guys from the poison. Hai Yun looked at him in surprise, and did not understand why he told them to close his mouth. The next second of the guy, a cloud of smallest luminous particles enveloped the guy, as if penetrating into each cell of the body. The young man coughed nervously, but Wu Yuanzuan calmly explained that this is a disinfectant that is completely safe for humans. After that, they had to undergo additional processing, and the guys went to the truck. Already in the car, Hai Yun, returning to the interrupted topic, asked why his voice touched his mentor so much. The girl, Pravnev, replied that this voice belonged to her former student, and sincere sadness sounded in her words. He probably didn't love her too much, since he gave her such an annoying nickname, because she was never loved by students. Hai Yun grinned and stated that the nickname was not at all a mocking character, causing a surprise in the girl. He explained that everyone remembered how Teacher Wu won the Teacher of Teachers, showing incredible endurance. The students joked that her power was so great that you can safely send her to the Olympics, so they came up with this nickname. The 5th level of force to run 5 circles. That's how it was, and not because of ridicule. A moment later, Wu Yuanzuan burst into a sonorous laugh, admiring how these children think unusually. It turned out that she was mistaken all this time, and the solution turned out to be a simple game of words. Hai Yun added that due to her strict behavior, students rarely could explain this intelligibly, but treated her with respect. Suddenly, someone tapped in the glass of the car, and the guys turned in synchronously. Outside the window, there was a tall, harsh guy who looked as if he had just passed through a mortal battle. He continued to beat violently on the glass, although there was no need for this, as if he wanted to break inside. Wu Yuanzuan grabbed her head, sighing heavily. Was this monster really again? Just incredibly? The young man asked in surprise who this man was. But Wu Yuanzuan only answered dryly that it was the one who would treat him, as with an experimental rabbit. Hai Yun looked scared at his mentor, in the hope that this was just a joke. But her expression did not inspire much confidence. The girl said that those who were interrogated by Gai Tiancheng went crazy, because he had a frightening ability to break the moral spirit. The next second, Wan Zuan shouted sharply to his partner so that he was in no hurry. She was already going to him. Hai Yun carefully asked if this man really wanted to ask her, but the girl only nodded, assuring that it was not scary. She explained that Gai Tiancheng, an important technical specialist responsible for the development of many devices, it was on him that they depended on whether they could close the portal and defeat the monsters, so his methods seemed justified. But suddenly Wu Yuanzuan remembered the crystal that Hai Yun gave her, and thought from where he could come from. At that moment, the guy remembered about the students who went crazy after interrogations, and felt an unpleasant chill on his back. The young man reluctantly admitted that he found this crystal right in front of the monster, as if a stone appeared from nowhere. Wu Yuanzuan looked at her partner with a slight disbelief, but decided not to ask unnecessary questions. A moment later, the girl stepped forward and added that, perhaps, a new mentor would want to ask him a few questions. However, the security unexpectedly blocked their way, recalling that the guys should observe quarantine. Gai Tiancheng calmly said that this is not a problem. They could continue to be in the car. Sometime later, the guys were going on, and Hai Yun did not take his eyes off the window, thinking intensely. Is it worth telling them about their abilities if these people can really help him? But after the words Miss Wu, fear prevailed that if they really want to use it as an experimental. On the other hand, everyone here has special skills. Perhaps the guy only differs slightly from the rest. If after interrogation and research it becomes stronger, then maybe the risk will be justified. Thoughts circled in his head. The young man did not know what to do, to reveal the truth or hide it. Suddenly, an unexpected notice appeared on the system screen, to allow others to see your abilities. Hai Yun froze, realizing that this thing really knows how to talk, and began to think about what to answer. At this time, Gai Tiancheng carefully watched a strange young man who vigorously waved his hands and talked to himself, as if he had been conducting a lively dialogue. At first glance, it seemed that this guy had obvious problems with his head, because what a sane person would have a conversation with empty space? Wu Yuanquan frowned displeasedly, and firmly stated that it was her student Hai Yun, and he was quite adequate, just slightly nervous after meeting with monsters in the portal. Gai Tiancheng objected, and recalled that this is far from the first case for a young man, because he had already entered the portal with Li Benhua. Wu Yuanquan raised her eyebrows in surprise and asked how the friend found out such details, but he only grunted and replied that he simply owns interesting facts. Then Gai Tiancheng added that the next time the van would be equipped with cameras for insulation, and the girl noted that he had a clear control mania. Meanwhile, Hai Yun discovered that the system does not provide him with the possibility of direct interaction, but it seems that he is well aware of what difficulties he faces. Finally, the hero made the final decision. No one should know about his abilities. This is the only right path. However, when he looked again at the system interface, she suddenly hid part of the information from him. It seemed that he had to have new experience points, but instead nothing had changed, as if the system intentionally concealed something. Instead of the expected data, a new function appeared, a reference book of all monsters, and the guy pressed it without hesitation. Before his eyes, an illustration of a huge stone monster arose, whose frightening and unshakable body seemed a living nightmare. Then another monster appeared, a nameless creature, reminiscent of a gigantic octopus with many tentacles. It turned out that the system collected data about all the monsters he met, creating something resembling a database from a video game. The next function was the choice of an object on the training site, but the young man did not quite understand its meaning and chose a creature with a low level of power. Suddenly, an indication appeared on the screen. Lie down in a convenient position and go into sleep mode. It seemed quite strange. But before the hero managed to think about the situation, a timer with the opposite reference arose in front of him. 10, 9, 8. His heart clogged faster, and a panic thought flickered in his head why the system launched this mysterious countdown. The numbers continued to flicker before the eyes. 7, 6, 5. Sensations of anxiety intensified when the counting reached 3. An unknown force enveloped his body, depriving the opportunity to move. The eyelids became heavy, the consciousness was clouded, and the young man realized that he was rapidly plunging into a deep dream, did not even have time to realize what exactly was happening. The system deduced the notification of the transition to the sleeping regime, and Ha-Yun lost control of his body, slowly sank to the ground, and instantly fell asleep. In a state of deep sleep, blood flowed from his nose with a thin stream, as if the body experienced something that went beyond the limits of everyday perception. Suddenly, the hero woke up and immediately broke out, realizing that a bright green beam was chasing him, pulsing powerful energy. The young man could not understand why he was again in this place, and what kind of strange power placed him in this dangerous environment. He probably chose the training site, and now the system has launched a combat simulation. But the possibility of illusion could not be excluded. However, despite all the absurdity of what was happening, the guy did not feel fear that his consciousness refused to perceive the situation as a threat. The next moment he abruptly broke, rushing forward as if the body itself knew what to do. Right before my eyes appeared a capsule with a pill, which seemed to expect when he would take it. If this is just an illusion, then the young man is in complete safety, which means that the choice of weapons does not represent any risk. Despite this, his body did not give in to relaxation. Probably the hero had to learn to control the level of adrenaline in the blood. He remembered the words of Wu Yuanzuan that the choice of weapons affects his combat skills, and looked at the wall. There were various types of weapons, massive axes, heavy picks, and other combat instruments. However, it was possible to manage only the weapon that was fully consistent with the internal state of the warrior. His gaze settled on a magnificent sword, which radiated an attractive force, clearly created specifically for him. Ha-Yun realized that it was this sword that was perfect, and held out his hand, feeling his power. As soon as the young man squeezed the hilt, the body was filled with fiery energy, running through the veins, like a living stream of power. With an incredible effort, the guy pulled a sword of stone, and at that moment he realized that he had found something more than just a weapon. He carefully examined the sword, and felt that he pulsed energy, as if he was connected with him at a deeper level. However, his triumph did not last long. Suddenly a monster approached the young man, who knocked him down at incredible speed. The guy flew back and crashed into the wall with a deft blow, and a monster towered in front of him, which seemed even more huge than before. At that moment, the enemy fiercely looked at Ha-Yun, holding his fist so that it seemed that he was ready to smash everything around with one blow. The hero, understanding the danger, made a rapid jump forward in the hope of avoiding the destructive attack of the monster and keep the chances of victory. Finally, he landed at a safe distance, but he realized that he could not forever run away. It was necessary to give the enemy a worthy rebuff. Realizing this, the young man accelerated, feeling the waves of rage and determination that had fed the fighting spirit rise inside him. The next second, the guy was right in front of a stone monster, who had already held out his massive hands to him, intending to grab. Despite the intensity of emotions, Ha-Yun understood that it would be difficult to cope with this enemy, because the enemy's power exceeded his expectations. Nevertheless, he gathered all his power, swung and inflicted a crushing blow, putting everything in it that he was capable of. The hero felt the delight of how powerful his new weapon turned out to be. It was created for destruction, and now it was in his hands. Of course, this is not some kind of chair or broom that the young man once tried to defend himself. But the enemies were not going to wait. They were approaching. The hero calculated the path of attack and realized that his only chance, move forward and go into battle without hesitation. Waving his sword in different directions, he sought to destroy as many enemies as possible, turning them into helpless fragments. Around him, the destroyed stone monsters fell, turning into a pile of stones one after another, leaving only dust behind. In the eyes of Ha-Yun, a fire flashed. The feeling of incredible power captured him whole, giving an unprecedented sense of power. The guy realized that he became stronger not only because of the new weapons, but also due to the fact that his level increased significantly. Now, he is no longer the helpless newcomer who was thrown out to die in the portal, but a warrior who can withstand even the most dangerous enemies. Standing at the top of piles of broken stone monsters, the young man burst into a crazy laugh, enjoying his triumph. His laughter became louder and more piercing, as if the hero finally understood his true power and purpose. Meanwhile, the workers noticed his strange behavior. The guy lay on the ground and laughed, as if being in some other world. Gei Tiancheng, watching him, only grunted, deciding that this young man simply fell asleep, and now sees some extremely unusual dream. He was surprised to note that Ha-Yun was asleep in an incredibly uncomfortable position. But, judging by his face, this dream was very exciting. Gei Tiancheng reached for Ha-Yun's head, patted his hair, and resolutely intended to get out of his sleep in order to make sure that everything was in order with the guy. At this time, Ha-yun noticed a sign of a system in front of him, which warned about an attempt to awaken in the real world, and offered to answer it. The guy came closer and was about to press yes, realizing that it was time to return. But deep down, he wanted to linger in this mysterious space. The young man closed his eyes for a moment, realizing that this amazing dimension would leave. But the real world had already demanded his return. Finally, the young man opened his eyes and was surprised to find that he really fell asleep, although it seemed to him that he had only plunged into his thoughts for a moment. Having risen, the young man noticed in front of him Ge Tian-chan, who looked at him with obvious interest, clearly tried to unravel the secret of his condition. The mentor invited the guy to check the coordination and show how many fingers on his hand to make sure that he was in full consciousness. However, Ha-yun irritatedly replied that there was no need to mock him, after which he slammed the mentor with anger, taking her to the side. Ge Tian-cheng only grinned and noticed that at least the young man certainly did not lose touch with reality. But what happened to him remained a mystery. Ha-yun thoughtfully ran his hand over his face and was surprised to find that he had blood from his nose, which he had not even noticed before. The young man looked anxiously at the red drops on his fingers, and Ge Tian-chung suggested that the guy could hit in a dream when he suddenly fell. Only now the young man began to realize what this strange notification appeared, which appeared on the system's plate before awakening. However, Ge Tian-chen watched him with curiosity, waiting for details. But Ha-yun did not tell and only briefly said that he had a normal dream. The mentor grunted, obviously not believing his words, because who would think to fall asleep at such a moment, and even in such a strange pose? The guy only shrugged and said that he might be just tired. Ge Tian-cheng noticed that the young man had much less endurance than Miss Wu, who, despite everything, felt quite normal. At this time, the woman was undergoing a medical examination, but it seemed vigorous, unlike Ha-yun, who looked noticeably exhausted. He went forward with a confident step, while Ha-yun reluctantly followed him. Turning slightly, Ge Tian-cheng threw over his shoulder that the hero himself would go the next examination. The young man froze in the place, amazed at this news, because he did not even think that some studies were also provided for him. Now the guy knew for sure that this person would really treat him like an experimental rat, and he had no choice but to obey. Ha-yun resolutely went out from behind the car and headed after Ge Tian-chan. Although he still did not know the name of this mysterious type, having caught up with a man, the young man asked his name, because it is strange to follow the man, not knowing who he is and what position he occupies. Ge Tian-cheng, not hiding his superiority, introduced himself with obvious arrogance, and said that he was a specialist in research and development in the 3rd Department of Hunters. Ha-yun was wondering what the technical unit is doing specifically, because probably this is due to the creation of new weapons for hunters. However, the mentor noted that the development of weapons, only a small part of their work, since they are in charge of much more complex and important projects. One of these projects was a special protective shield that had unique capabilities and could be used in various situations. Ge Tian-chung did not go into details and just ordered the young man to get into the car next to him, as a long road was coming. Ha-yun wanted to know more about the shield, but the mentor, busy with his thoughts, only quit that he did not have time to explain right now. Realizing that it was useless to ask more, the young man decided not to waste time in vain and opened his system to check the changes. He found that you can earn points on the training site, and decided that in the future he should have accumulated as much as possible. At this moment, the young man was surprised to notice that a monster with huge tentacles he faced earlier now has an official name for touching darkness. At the same time, Ge Tian-chung, as if reading his thoughts, pronounced the same name, as if it was precisely what was going to say now. They both almost unanimously uttered the touches of darkness, which turned out to be so unexpected that silence hung between them for a few seconds. Ha-yun froze and did not know how to explain this strange moment, because in this way he clearly betrayed himself, and then reflexively covered his mouth with his hand, realizing that he had almost given out his ability. Ge Tian-chung immediately turned to him with obvious suspicion, trying to understand where this guy could know the name of the monster at all. His gaze became prickly, and tension hung in the air, because such coincidences simply did not occur, and he intended to figure it out. Ha-yun quickly realized that he urgently needed to come up with something, and without unnecessary thoughts, he gave out that he simply accidentally looked into the mentor's phone. To add persuasiveness, the hero apologized for his carelessness and admitted that he had taken curiosity, but he would no longer repeat this mistake. Ha-yun pretended to sincerely repent, but inside himself understood that he should be careful if he did not want to reveal his secret. Gei Tianqing, with a serious expression on his face, advised the young man next time to think well before trying to look into other people's phones without permission. However, deep down could not get rid of doubts, because he was sure that this explanation was not so simple, and the guy clearly hides something. An anti-spion filter was installed on his phone, which darkened the screen at a certain angle, and Hai Yun himself did not even look in his direction at that moment. The mentor began to think that this young man may not be so ordinary, and he needs to find out what exactly his secret is. Not wanting to miss anything important, Gei Tiancheng turned on the program on his phone to record everything that he would now hear from Hai Yun. The time has come to go to the main question, and the mentor demanded that the guy tell in detail about everything that happened to him today. Hai Yun began by the fact that after the lessons, the teacher of Wu left him in training to help him activate the hunter's abilities. But the portal suddenly opened. The young man tried to speak calmly, describing in detail the events that they had to endure, but at the same time carefully went around some details. Having reached the moment when he was seized by dark tentacles, Hai Yun admitted that he did not see how the teacher of the Wu eventually defeated the monster. Gatenching noted that the guy's story is too blurry and differs from the fact that Miss Wu said, as if he was intentionally hiding something. In response, Hai Yun referred to strong fear, saying that he was too scared at that moment, and therefore his memory did not restore events completely, but partially. In reality, the young man was simply afraid to speak too much, because any extra word could give out his secret. The mentor translated the conversation to another question and asked to explain where he got the crystal that he handed over to Miss Wu. Hai Yun replied that he had found him near the monster, but then it became incomprehensible how the guy guessed his ability to activate the power of the hunter. This time, the young man was confused, but, without inventing anything better, he gave out that he simply guessed and said it at random, hoping that intuition did not fail him. When the stone was in his hands, the hero felt a strange power in him, and therefore suggested that he had an effect. However, Gei Tiancheng asked why he himself did not use the stone. Hai Yun quickly stated that he decided to give him Miss Wu, since she was much more experienced, and explained that it was like in races. Instead of helping the weak to survive, it is better to put the resource in the one who is already strong enough to win. Gei Tiancheng nodded thoughtfully, agreeing that the young man did the right thing, because this is exactly what should be acted in a critical situation. The mentor also recalled that Wu Yunquan told him about the strange intuition Hai Yun, who was too accurate to be just an accident. Gei Tiancheng thought about the strange abilities of the guy and suggested that he go through several simple tests to check his capabilities in controlled conditions. Hai Yun immediately decided to refuse, but the mentor peremptorily stated that he had no choice, and this is more like a mandatory check than to an offer. The young man grinned, realizing that it was more like coercion, and began to think how to avoid excess attention to his abilities. In return, Gei Tiancheng proposed to conduct a tour of the technical department where they develop a new weapon, and this deal seemed highly profitable. As a result, the guy agreed, but at first he had to go home to relax well, and at the appointed time he would come to the meeting. When the young man got out of the car, he noticed nearby several people in protective spaceships, who were clearly engaged in something important. Hai Yun looked after the departing car, which instantly broke out, leaving only dust clubs and a short flicker of headlights. He thought that this Gei Tiancheng is probably not a simple person, and if he decided to become interested in, then perhaps he should be afraid of his attention. At this moment, the system proposed to hide its abilities from prying eyes, and Hai Yun realized that he should be careful in words and actions. When the young man finally ended up in his room, pitch darkness was already gathering outside the window, and the only source of light was a bright, cold moon. He lay on the bed, closed his eyes, and gradually plunged into sleep, reflecting on the events of the past day and that he could wait ahead. In a dream, the guy again found himself in a terrible maze of stairs, along which he ran tirelessly, while the roar of the monsters pursuing him was heard behind him. The staircase seemed endless, and its cold stone steps went into darkness, turning this place into a real nightmare, from which it was impossible to wake up. At some point, Hai Yun, gathering all his strength, jumped forward, but almost felt the wriggling tentacles of monsters sliding very close. He understood that this was just a dream, but even here it seemed to him that the young man should still fight in order to escape and break out of this trap. Finally, the hero landed on a firm surface and realized that he would not be able to just run away. A new series of attacks awaits him ahead. Suddenly, he noticed a strange metal golden ring on his hand, which looked as if it had some kind of hidden force. Without hesitation, The guy tore it off his fingers and threw it right into the monster with incredible force, hoping that it would work as he needed. And indeed, the weapon hit the target exactly and chopped the enemy into small pieces. It was a training site that he himself chose. But even here, everything that was happening seemed at the same time frightening and exciting. The young man looked at his weapons, easy to use, but effective, and thought how great it would be to find something similar in the real world. Meanwhile, the monster approached the other side, and his terrible silhouette merged with darkness. Ha-Yun resolutely rushed forward and prepared for the attack, realizing that delay could cost him too expensive. The young man inflicted clear and accurate blows, each of which was verified to the smallest detail, forcing the enemy to retreat back under the pressure of his attack. The hero made a powerful jump, feeling the air shrinking around him, and the tension reached its peak at this decisive moment of the battle. Finally, he landed, firmly standing on his feet, and looked in front of him, realizing that the victory was in his hands, and the monster no longer posed a threat. With animation, Ha-Yun realized that he managed to cope with the enemy, and this discovery was incredible for him, instilled new confidence. However, unexpectedly next to him was Gei Tianqing, who calmly asked who he had just won. The young man in a panic sharply sat down, his heart pounded furiously, and then, realizing that this was reality, in anger asked what the mentor was doing at his place. Gei Tianqing calmly replied that his mother let him in, after which he handed the guy a backpack. Ha-Yun was still in shock. It seemed to him impossible why his mother really let him in. The mentor explained that they contacted his mother, told her about everything so that she would not worry, and at the same time brought him his mobile phone. The young man picked up the phone and with chagrin saw that the battery was completely discharged, which means that he would have to charge him first. At that moment, Gei Tianqing said that quarantine was officially completed, and now Ha-Yun needs to dress and go with him immediately to the base. The guy reluctantly got up, but taking a few steps, suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head, which made him freeze for a moment. The mentor suggested that perhaps his wounds had not yet been completely healed, and offered to wait for a hunter who could treat him. However, Ha-Yun only shook his head and replied that everything was in order with him, not wanting to show his weakness before the mentor, in which case, Gei Tianqing said that he was better to hurry. The young man slowly sat back on the bed and took a breath deep, trying to gather his thoughts and overcome the unpleasant sensations. His whole body hurt, as if he did not spend the night in his room, but a real battle in which each muscle received its own share of the load. The young man realized that if he trained all night on the site, then the pain now spread to his real body. The guy began to change clothes, deciding to remove his pajamas, but unexpectedly noticed that his muscles became much more embossed and strong than they were before. This discovery struck him, because until recently the young man looked completely different, and now his body seemed stronger and more resilient than ever. He enthusiastically examined himself and understood that training was not in vain, and efforts led to an impressive result. Ha-Yun experienced a real surge of joy, because now his physical form was like a real fighter who was able to cope with any challenge. Meanwhile, Gei Tianqing calmly waited for him in the corridor, holding the phone in his hands and carefully watching what was happening on the screen. The mentor saw the guy stood in the middle of the room with a wide smile, and was clearly delighted. Gei Tianqing could not understand what this was so amused by the young man, and thought about whether he was just a complete idiot. At that moment, Wu Yuanzuan arrived at the hospital, clutching a bouquet tightly in her hands. Her gaze was serious, and thoughts were occupied with only one person. She confidently approached the registration stance and asked the nurse where a patient named Ha-Yun is currently located. However, the girl at the persistent calmly replied that he had already left the hospital with Gei Tianqing, and this news caused her a clear bewilderment. The heroine could not believe in what she heard. Her face froze for a moment, and in her eyes there was a sincere shock from this unexpected news. She took a few steps forward, feeling the alarm grows inside, because she could not allow this guy to happen to this guy. Wu Yuanquan turned sharply, and her gaze fell on the car, which was already hiding in the distance, taking away with him the one she was looking for. The girl felt her anger growing because Gei Tianqing acted too fast, and she simply did not manage to intervene in time. Meanwhile, the car rushed forward along the road, leaving behind the hospital and everything that happened a few minutes ago. Inside the building of Gei Tianqing and Ha-Yun walked along a spacious corridor filled with muffled light. Their steps were echoed in silence. The young man looked around with curiosity, and at some point asked where to charge his phone, which was completely discharged here. However, the mentor only quit coldly that phone calls in this place were strictly prohibited, leaving no slightest space for objections. Ha-Yun was surprised, Is it really so strict that even the usual request seems to be something unacceptable and superfluous here? Gei Tiancheng did not answer, only silently stepped forward, confidently opened the heavy door and first went inside. There were several people in the office. Some were focused at work at the tables, while others went from corner to corner, discussing something among themselves. Gei Tiancheng silently took his hand Haiyun and put on her a strange bracelet, which looked unusual and clearly had some special purpose. The guy looked at the device in surprise, not understanding why he had him, and asked the mentor that he had just fixed it on his wrist. The man calmly explained that this is a special badge for guests who are allowed temporary access to the research institute. Then Gei Tiancheng recalled that he promised to conduct a tour of the technical department, and suggested that the young man carefully examine everything around. In one part of the room there was a cold weapon, and in the other various types of firearms were exhibited, each with unique characteristics. The hero's gaze settled on one sword that was directed into a heavy stone. Haiyun's eyes immediately lit up when he noticed a sword that he recently used among the exhibits, and immediately pointed to him. This discovery was incredibly surprised by Gei Tiancheng. He sharply turned to the guy and looked at him in bewilderment. How the newcomer could know the name of this weapon. The next second, the young man, while maintaining calm, casually noticed that the name was written right on the stand, and exhaled with relief. Gei Tiancheng, slightly disappointed with this explanation, nodded, admitting his forgetfulness, but not removing a suspicious look. Haiyun understood that this person still remembers the case of touching darkness, which means that he needs to be more careful in his words and actions. At that moment, the bracelet on the wrist suddenly lit up with bright green light, attracting the attention of everyone who was nearby. A cunning mentor immediately realized that the frequency of the Haiyun pulse increased sharply, which means that the guy was clearly nervous at the moment. The young man, trying to hide his excitement, said with admiration that he would also like such a weapon, but it seems that it costs a lot of money. Gei Tiancheng calmly replied that their department was engaged exclusively with research and developments, and you can only purchase this in a special store, but such things are expensive. Haiyun said that when he became an official hunter, he will have the opportunity to earn good money on the portals. Gei Tiancheng agreed, because work in the zones of anomalies is dangerous, therefore is well paid. The young man became interested and asked what work options there are, to which the mentor explained what can either serve the state or become a mercenary. He explained that mercenaries are civilian organizations that do not obey the state, but they receive higher payment. Unlike them, state hunters should always be in touch, but they are the first to receive the latest weapons and information. Haiyun realized that he needed to think about this issue well, because he has not yet fully understands all the nuances of this dangerous work. Gei Tiancheng noted that the newcomer who survived attacks in 2 different portals, the phenomenon is quite rare. Haiyun hastened to answer that in both cases he was absolutely helpless, and simply miraculously managed to get out of the chat. The conversation ended on this, and they continued to move on, gradually delving into the technical department of the research center. Gei Tiancheng recalled that he had fulfilled his promise and conducted an excursion, and now the time has come to Haiyun to fulfill his part of the agreement. The guy strained and felt his body covered with cold later. Are they really going to use it as experimental experiments? Soon he was placed in a special capsule, where the mentor carefully studied the indicators of the devices, and then gestured the young man to go down. After that, he was informed that it was necessary to undergo another examination, including the cardiogram, which caused a guy bewilderment. Haiyun did not understand why all this was needed, because he expected the usual medical examination, and was not ready for such close attention. Remembering the intimidation of the teacher Wu, the hero seriously thought that he could be opened and dissected as a laboratory frog. Gei Tiancheng, noticing his tension, advised to relax and behave naturally, which only increased the suspicion of the young man. Then the mentor approached him closely and insinuatingly asked what he was hiding. Staring at his face intently, Haiyun's eyes widened with surprise, and he, trying to remain calm, carefully asked what exactly his companion had in mind. Gei Tiancheng dryly noticed that his pulse was sharply more frequent, which means that the guy is clearly not saying something and he has something to hide. Now the young man realized that the bracelet on his wrist is used as a kind of lies detector, capable of fixing the slightest changes in the body. Compared to previous medical indicators, the percentage of fat in his body decreased, and muscle and bone mass increased markedly. Moreover, the growth rate of its muscles exceeds the usual indicators. Haiyun flashed with anger and sharply demanded an explanation of where Gei Tiancheng got such detailed information about his physical condition. The man calmly replied that he had received his medical card from school and carefully studied all the notes made by the doctors. The young man was shocked, realizing that this person not only followed him, but also carefully analyzed the slightest changes in his body. At that moment, Gaetian-chung leaned slightly to him and noticed that he had spent 3 months in a coma, which means that there could simply not be such physical changes. He recalled that Ha-yun, an ordinary newcomer who managed to get out of 2 portals at once, which in itself raises questions. In addition, the guy used a folding chair and a regular broom to activate his abilities, which is why Gaetian-chung intended to get to the bottom of the truth and find out what this mysterious young man actually hides. Suddenly, the door swung open with a noise, and Vu Yuanzuan entered the office, whose expression clearly said that she was very nervous and hurried. She looked around the room, and then, almost without hiding irritation, she asked what exactly Gaetian-chung was going to do with her student and why he was here. Ha-yun froze in the place, surprised by the appearance of his mentor, and then, recovering, hastily rose from the bunk and began to look around. Seeing his clothes, the guy quickly grabbed her and hastened to dress, intending to leave this strange place as soon as possible. Gaetian-chung, without even blinking, calmly stated that the most ordinary physical examination is being held here, so there is no reason for concern. However, Vu Yuanzuan clearly did not believe. This man expertly exerted psychological pressure, forcing students to give out their secrets. The girl resolutely grabbed Ha-yun, firmly saying that they immediately left this place, and the conversation was over by Gaetian-chung spent them with a thoughtful look. And then he hammered to the young man arrogantly, as if remembering something important. He said that if Ha-yuni liked some kind of weapon, then he could contact him, and he will help him learn to treat him. However, Vu Yuanzuan did not even want to listen to anything. She rushed the student, ordering him not to linger and immediately follow her. When they left, Ha-yun noticed that his mentor was clearly disliked by Gaetian-chan, and decided to clarify who he was at all. The girl replied that this is not just an engineer of the Technology Development Department, but a person developing weapons for hunters. However, despite his work, he hates a hunting association, perhaps even stronger than her opponent's hate. When Gaetian-chung studied the portals, he came to an alarming conclusion that almost caused a real scandal. In his opinion, monsters not only appear by chance, but were deliberately released into this world by one of the hunters. Moreover, he repeatedly stated that hunters and monsters are actually the same force, which is why he had conflicts with colleagues. After all these events, Wanzuan began to doubt whether this type can be good at all of the hunters. At that moment, Ha-yun suddenly stopped, forcing the girl to turn sharply and look at him in surprise. She asked what happened, and did not change his mind to leave. The young man was too shocked from what he heard but did not want to show it, so he only shrugged and said that he had forgotten something. It turned out that the hero never removed the bracelet that he was given at the entrance, and now he needs to be returned back. However, Wanzuan did not even listen to this. She sharply removed the bracelet from his hand and calmly stated that she would return it herself. Vu Yuanquan carefully examined the bracelet, making sure that there were no bugs or hidden devices on it, because even the slightest threat could be too expensive. Ha-yun apologized for causing such anxiety with his appearance, while the guys moved forward. Gaetian-chung was watching them inseparably, evaluating every step and looking for the slightest signs of weakness or fluctuations in their determination. The guy remained silent, but his gaze remained gathering, focused, as if he was trying to solve something important, hidden behind external calm. Finally, the city enveloped the night, and the moon rose in the dark sky, illuminating the street with the soft light of the street. Ha-yun sat in his room when he heard his mother's voice, carefully asking if he wanted to stay in the hospital for a few more days for complete recovery. However, the young man replied that he feels normally, and in the hospital walls it is too cold and empty, unlike his home, where he could finally relax. The woman agreed with her son, noting that Xiaohua also dreams of returning home, because the hospital caused her only alarming memories. Ha-yun calmly assured his mother that it was not worth worrying, because soon his sister will be discharged, and together they will easier to cope with the experienced. When my mother left, the young man again plunged into gloomy thoughts, thinking about the monsters that the hunter released, and what danger they were now exposed. Is it really he? The young man opened the portal first, but now is not the time for doubt, because the answer to this question was still not obvious. You should not have hung up on thoughts that only interfered with moving forward, because attempts to understand the unknown could only slow down it. The guy decided that it was better to hurry up and focus on the destruction of monsters, because the more he is the fastens of the glasses, the higher his chances of survival will be. He ended up on the training site, where stony monsters, motionless and formidable, as if waiting for the moment for an attack, stood everywhere. The guy swung sharply, preparing for a blow, while opponents surrounded him from all sides, leaving no chance of retreat. Goten-chung continuously watched him, carefully evaluating every movement. Suddenly, the pulse of Hai Yuni became more frequent. His heart was pounded furiously, and his breath was straying. Goten-chung was incredibly surprised and very discouraged, because what was happening went beyond his understanding. As this is possible, the young man deftly wielded his sharp sword, breaking the stones with force. Each of his blows was accurate and honed. In a dream, Hai Yun moved smoothly and confidently. His body was performed by intricate blows. At this time, Goten-chung began to quickly knock on the keyboard, gaining long sequences of characters and analyzing something on the screen in front of him. When the man saw something, his eyes widened. He clearly did not expect this. Hai Yun continued to fight in a dream, waving his arms and honing blows, as if an invisible enemy stood against him. Goten-chung did not take his eyes off him. His eyes narrowed from concentration. He carefully studied the movements of the young man and made some conclusions. At that moment, the young hero exhaled sharply and froze. As if in his imagination, the duel came to an end, and consciousness returned to reality. The mentor grinned smugly, leaned back in his chair and seemed to be pleased with what he saw. His theory was gradually confirmed. Meanwhile, Hai Yun woke up, sat on the bed, yawned sweetly, not even suspecting that very soon his morning would be broken by an unexpected visit. At that moment, he was already standing at the door. He was decisive and loud. He obviously was not going to leave, not getting an answer. Mother Hai Yunya opened the door and looked at an uninvited guest in bewilderment, obviously not expecting to see a person from a research institute at the threshold. The man calmly explained that he had come to talk with a young man, but the woman looked at him warily and said that her son was still sleeping. However, Goten-chung confidently stated that the young man had already woken up, and before the hostess of the house managed to object, he suggested that he wake him up. At that moment, his mother was heard behind his mother, and Hai Yun left the room, rubbing his eyes sleepily, after which he asked what happened. The woman said that this man was looking for him. Her voice was tense, and her gaze expressed his distrust of an unexpected guest. Goten-chung smiled and greeted the young man, but he frowned and irritatedly asked how this type generally found out where he lives. However, quickly realizing who he was dealing with, he himself answered his question. For a person who climbs into someone else's life, such information is not a secret. To reassure his mother, Hai Yun said that everything was in order. They are familiar. This person works in the technical department and is developing weapons for hunters. Then the young man closed the door, not wanting his mother to hear the conversation, and directly asked why he came, feeling that the conversation would be difficult. Goten-chung settled in a chair as if he were a master here, and then said that he was extremely interested in where Hai Yun disappeared last night. The young man looked at him in surprise, but confidently stated that he was at home all night, and as expected, was sleeping calmly, without leaving his room. However, Goten-chung shook his head, grinned incredulously, and said that if his body is again measured, it turns out that the muscle mass increased. Hai Yun frowned. His voice became tougher. He asked for what exactly the mentor wants to say this, and why he made such conclusions so confidently. Goten-chung calmly stated that the indicators of activity over the past night clearly show that the young man had subjected his body to incredibly strong physical exertion. It was simply amazing. Hai Yun could not understand where this person had such accurate data, because he was sure that no one followed him. But the mentor only recalled that he had recently gave him a bracelet, and although the young man had already managed to forget about it, now everything began to form a single picture. Hai Yunya's gaze was instantly filled with anger. He looked sharply at the man and confidently stated that this bracelet was removed and gave to the teacher Wu. If he was really going to follow him, then this could not work, because the bracelet was not with him, which means that the data simply could not be transmitted. However, Goten-chung did not even argue, but calmly offered to look at the hand on which the young man put this bracelet dressed more carefully. Hai Yun frowned, but driven by curiosity, nevertheless looked down at his wrist, and what he saw forced him to freeze from the shock. He blinked several times, not believing his eyes, but the fact remained the fact. On his skin now a strange white rectangle flaunted. The young man peered more carefully. The heart was beating faster. It was like a miniature chip. Probably this device somehow remained after removing the bracelet. Goten-chung quickly removed him, and explained that the device allowed the pulse to track for 12 hours. which means that all this time he knew about every movement of it. If Ha-Yun was more attentive, he would have noticed this cunning game. But now it was too late. The data was collected, and the mentor received the necessary information. The face of Ji Tiancheng remained calm. He squeezed the chip in his fist, then he slowly unclenched his fingers, and small pieces of plastic fell on the floor. Ha-Yun was furious. He clenched his fists and demandingly asked why this type even needed to follow his body and what he was trying to find out. Ge Tiancheng calmly replied that his goal, to understand what hunters who call themselves saviors are, and where did they get such abilities. He then clarified that the main thing for him is to find out that these so-called defenders actually do on the ground, and why their appearance coincided with disasters. Ha-Yun could not stand it, and indignantly stated that all this was complete nonsense. He was born and raised on Earth, and his life was no different from the life of an ordinary person. However, Ge Tiancheng squinted skeptically, and asked if he really believes that from birth he had the ability to kill terrible monsters. But the young man annoyedly interrupted him, demanding to stop talking nonsense, because he, like everyone else, received the abilities of the hunter, and was not born with them. The mentor said that at the time of the appearance of portals, many people simultaneously fell into a coma, and after waking up they suddenly found strange abilities. Along with this, monsters appeared on Earth, which means that hunters, like monsters, are the product of portals, and their appearance cannot be considered a simple coincidence. That is why Ge Tiancheng doubted that Ha-Yun was still the same person as he was before, because his body and mind could change after awakening. There was a tense silence in the room. The young man tried to realize the meaning of these words, but with every moment his mind was more and more filled with anxious thoughts. However, the mentor continued to speak, suggesting that the same Ha-Yun that existed before perhaps had long died, and now someone else has taken his place. These words sounded like a lightning blow. The shock swept the guy, but after a moment his anger prevailed, and he screamed in a rage, demanding that he was silent, At that moment, the door to the room swung open, and the young man's mother entered with a tray in her hands. Looking around both of them in surprise, she asked what was happening here and why her son screamed so. Then the woman looked at the guest and, trying not to show anxiety, asked why he was still standing and not sitting down at the table. Ge Tiancheng replied that he was just about to leave. He turned around and a confident gait headed for the exit, and before disappearing behind the door, calmly noticed that he had more important things. Now Ha-Yun was fully aware of why Miss Wu hated this man so much, and could not disagree that her hostility was completely justified.